call to order this regular meeting of the North County Transit District for May 16th, 2019. And I would like to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller,
Here.
Tony Krantz,
Here.
John Franklin, Paul McNamara, Jim Desmond, Dave Druker, Joel Edson, Sharon Jenkins, Priya Patel.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And if everybody would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Anthony Flores, Clerk of the Board, will now provide a safety brief and review of evacuation procedures.
Thank you, sir. In the event of an emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please use the stairs. Once outside the building, please do not come back into the building unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator on the first floor and staff on hand training CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief.
Very good, thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes, sir. However, I did want to note to the board that there are two consent items, or two parts of the consent calendar today. We'll be doing two separate votes, but they're both consent, sir.
Okay. Very good. Are there any public speakers?
No, sir.
All right. So as the clerk just described, we have two consent. We have two sections of the consent, part 1 and part 2. Consent items 1 through 11 are in part 1, and I would entertain motions for approval. All right, I've got, okay, oops, minutes. How did I get to skip that? Okay, excuse me. Let's go back. We'll approve the minutes, if we would, please. Okay, minute approval, Board Member Druker, seconded by Board Member, Vice Chair Feller.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Druker, seconded by Board Vice Chair Jack Feller to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on April 18th, 2019. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, very good. Now we move on to consent items part 1, which are numbered 1 through 11.
Before we vote, sir, if I may, there was no change to the agenda. I wanted to go back. There was an update to agenda item 16 to receive the monthly intergovernmental affairs report. The staff report was updated to include a presentation by NCD staff on the status of the discretionary grant strategy and application process. However, there were no changes to the recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that correction. All right. Consent items 1 through 11, motion for approval by Board Member Druker, seconded by Board Member Edson.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Druker, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve consent items 1 through 11, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Consent item part 2 is item number 12 to authorize the executive director to execute a memorandum of understanding with the city of Escondido for bus stop repairs and maintenance.
Second.
A motion by Board Member Druker, second by Vice Chair Feller. Please vote.
For your own stuff.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Druker, seconded by Board Vice Chair Jack Feller to approve consent item number 12, motion passes with all board members present voting yes. Board Member McNamara abstains.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to other business item number 13. And for this item, Katie Persons, Transit Planner, Strategic Planning, will review.
Good afternoon. I'm joined by Marissa Mangan, Associate Regional Planner at Sandag, and Claudia Huerta, Senior Program Manager at City of Carlsbad. Today, we'll be giving a presentation on the partnership between NCTD, Sandag, and the City of Carlsbad. Initially, NCTD and Sandag collaborated to address potential mobility hub opportunities in North County. We then joined concurrent efforts with the City of Carlsbad to expand this partnership and provide a connection between the Coaster Poinsettia Station and Carlsbad businesses along Palomar Airport Road. And we also intend to expand this partnership in the future beyond the three agencies with robust employer outreach. So now Marissa will provide some background and an overview of our planning efforts.
Thanks, Katie. NCTD and Sandag began collaborating in late 2018 to brainstorm opportunities for potential mobility hub pilots. So we talked about enhancing connections to Poinsettia Coaster Station, like Katie mentioned, in addition to Sereno Valley, thinking about how we could better connect existing and potential new transit riders to employment centers located in very suburban areas. We were also looking at opportunities for the Sprinter in terms of micromobility solutions. And then just recently, we've also been coordinating with NCTD on deploying a bike share pilot in 3 out of the 5 North County coastal cities. So that's been a really good opportunity to pilot some mobility hub concepts in the North County. So what exactly are mobility hubs? Mobility hubs leverage shared services and technologies to provide a seamless travel experience. They provide for connections that go beyond the first and last mile, really honing in on those shared motorized services to help better connect people to and from trunk line transit services. Walking and biking really account for those first last mile opportunities, but we realize that some of the access areas around transit are much larger, much wider, especially given the Carlsbad community context where we have some employers located beyond first last mile. Mobility hubs are also playing a really large role in Sandag's regional plan. It's one of the 5 big moves that we've recently started marketing regarding how our new transportation vision can be much bolder and provide an entire network of mobility hubs around the region. Like I mentioned, in the North County context, first last mile really becomes more of a few mile problem. Taking our rich employment center in Carlsbad, there's a lot of life science, tech, hospitality industries in Carlsbad, and it's a really great economic development driver. But folks that are either driving there already or maybe already taking the coaster feel like they don't have enough connections to the coaster. They don't have any other options but to drive alone. And if there's people who are currently taking the coaster, they may have a harder time using a breeze bus given the time constraint, or if they're maybe interested in wanting to try the coaster, they really need more of an on-demand seamless connection via motorized solution. Taking the example of Palomar Airport Road at El Camino Real, that distance on the road is 5 miles. So it's really a longer distance that we have to try to facilitate connections for. And the employees really need more of an on-demand solution. Looking at results from Sandag's 2018 commute behavior survey, we found some very encouraging results in the fact that 70% of drive-alone commuters would try using public transit if there was a more convenient way to get to and from the station. And 26% of those drive-alone commuters would actually prefer some kind of on-demand rideshare service, something that's motorized similar to an Uber, Lyft, or Waze carpool. So there's some potential there in terms of trying to get some drive-alone commuters to shift to try using transit, thereby trying to help reduce congestion on some of the local freeways. So in terms of the Poinsettia Coaster Station pilot that we've been working with NCTD and the City of Carlsbad to deploy, this would be one of the first pilots in a series we hope to continue collaborating on. It directly supports NCTD's goal of increasing coaster ridership. As far as this particular pilot is concerned, we've set a goal of 100 average new daily coaster riders, and we'll see where it goes from there. We're also partnering with the City of Carlsbad because this type of pilot directly supports their climate action plan and their new TDM program that Council recently adopted about a month ago. All 3 agencies are working with the selected service provider. City of Carlsbad had released an RFP late last year to put out for an on-demand shared motorized service. Rideco is the name of that provider. City of Carlsbad still working out the agreement terms, and they hope to execute an agreement with them next month. We're having some preliminary conversations with Rideco and all agencies to talk about both service planning and marketing and outreach. As far as service planning is concerned, we're really trying to hone in on what data we have available to us. Any baseline commute survey data that the Sandag iCommute program has collected from Carlsbad employers, looking at census data regarding origin destination patterns, trying to work with RideCo to figure out what are the potential routes, what kind of simulations in terms of virtual stops, which I'll get to in a moment, and potential routes that can allow for a more on-demand, seamless, direct connection to and from Coaster. And then trying to figure out how much can we fill some of these RideCo on-demand service vehicles. And the important part of checking in with commuters that are using the service midway and after the pilot, not only to figure out their trip patterns, but also get more information on their travel behavior preferences, what they liked or didn't like about the pilot, because it's all a learning experience. Regarding marketing and outreach, we're going to leverage a lot of existing resources that both the City of Carlsbad and Sandag have as part of our regional employer outreach program. Boots on the ground, working with RideCo to reach out to employers minimum of 1 month before the pilot starts, in addition to throughout the pilot, to really educate employees about this new option that they have available to them, while also marketing an existing Tri-Transit program that Sandag NCTD have going, whereby commuters can get a free 30-day coaster pass to try the coaster, and then that also allows them to receive a ride on the on-demand rideshare service complimentary. And then, of course, using targeted electronic media, including social media, to really try to recruit as many employers as we can to try out the new service. Up here on the upper right, you'll see the new rideshare service brand, Carlsbad Connector, and a sneak peek at what the app will look like. It's an app-enabled on-demand rideshare service. We're providing rides for both peak period commute times, so those northbound coasters destined for Poinsettia Station, and then again southbound coaster trains, and then allowing for some midday travel options. So when folks are taking the coaster to go to work, they now find themselves carless maybe for the first time. They now can rely on the on-demand rideshare service to provide any kind of lunchtime travel needs, whether it is for lunch or midday errands, etc. We're allowing commuters to reserve seats on the vehicles. There's going to be 4 total vehicles to start, each 12-passenger vehicles, one of which will be ADA accessible. All 4 of the vehicles will have bike racks as a nice feature in case folks do want to bring a bike on board. All vehicles equipped with Wi-Fi. People can get work done on the vehicles to and from their employment center. And there are going to be 5 peak period commute direction coaster trips, 2 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. App is going to emulate what most of us are already used to if we use services like Uber and Lyft in terms of being able to make a reservation, ride hailing on the spot, getting real-time tracking information about where the vehicle is at any given time.
So today we will be asking the board to approve an MOU between NCTD, Sandag, and the City of Carlsbad, as well as an Exhibit A, which will be the funding mechanism for the pilot program. So this MOU will establish the formal working relationship between the 3 agencies in order to provide that 12-month pilot program. NCTD's portion of this service is not to exceed $200,000. And we'll be monitoring and adjusting the service as necessary throughout the 12-month period and evaluating it concurrently with our fixed route service so that we can determine the future implementation beyond the pilot program. So this MOU specifically includes that 12-month pilot program. And then in order to fund that, we have our Exhibit A. So the Exhibit A covers both this pilot program as well as a continuation of the planning efforts for NCTD and Sandag. And so that will look at other potential mobility hub projects in North County. So NCTD's proposed contribution for the Exhibit A is $300,000, $200,000 of which would go towards the Carlsbad pilot program, and the remaining $100,000 would be reserved for future mobility hub programs. And so we'll continue to work with Sandag and some other stakeholders to identify future potential projects, and that might include other business parks throughout North County, some shared micromobility services at key stations, wherever that's enabled. And then we will also use resources such as Sandag's iCommute resources, the North County Economic Development Council, and NCTD's Land Use and Transit Integration Study to further inform those decisions. Additionally, last week, a funding opportunity was announced for the FTA's Integrated Mobility Innovation Program. So there's funding set aside specifically for mobility on-demand services. So we'll pursue an opportunity to get grant funding through that program. So today, staff recommends that the board approve an Exhibit A with Sandag for the planning and implementation of mobility hub pilot projects in North County in an amount not to exceed $300,000, and also approve an MOU with Sandag and the City of Carlsbad for the procurement and implementation of an on-demand rideshare service with Radco at the Carlsbad Poinsettia Coaster Station. And with that, are there any questions?
Board Member Edson.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. So you mentioned in your very speedy delivery that there will be free 30, I don't know if I was writing notes quite quickly enough, but free 30-day pass on coaster for those participating in the beginning. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll be able to leverage our existing Tri-Transit program funded separately from this pilot to be able to hand out an additional 200 extra 30-day coaster passes.
Okay, and do those also align with free 30-day passes for the shuttles on-demand service?
Yes, if folks have a 30-day coaster pass in hand, then they'll be able to use the on-demand ride service complimentary as well.
Okay, and are the 200 passes, are those based on first come, first serve, or?
Yes.
Okay, and the hours that is it all on demand, or will there be actually any shuttle type of route planned for the businesses?
The vehicles will time their arrival at the coaster station with coaster train arrival at 5 different times, 7:09 in the morning, 8:36 in the morning, and 3 different afternoon times between 3:30 and 5, depending on when all those 5 coaster trains arrive. Folks can reserve a seat when they're on the train to be able to make sure they have a seat reserved in their on-demand rideshare vehicle, or when they exit the train can hail it on demand, but we'll always make sure to time the shared ride service with the coaster arrivals. I think it's more of an issue when folks are hailing midday trips or at an employment site where they're going to have to hail a ride and wait a few minutes for the vehicle to come to that meeting point.
Okay, so when I moved to Solana Beach, I thought, wonderful, I can work at my job in Sorrento Valley. And I could get to my job in Sorrento Valley, but my job did not end by 5 p.m. So I couldn't actually get home because my employer actually had a shuttle that would take me from Sorrento Valley Station to their location, but their shuttle service stopped at 5 or 6 o'clock. We all worked till, I don't know, crazy hours, as late as 9 o'clock. So there was not coaster service, but there also was not shuttle service. Have you talked to employers and discussed the hours that their employees are working and looked at whether 3:30 to 5 is something that's actually going to accommodate enough people to get them to get to work and also get home?
Yeah, there's going to be a range of work shift end times. I think the first factor is when how the coaster schedule is set right now. So after 5:09, I don't believe there's a coaster train immediately arriving, so there's not that opportunity until I think after 7:30. There's one.
Sorry. So right now what we have, the hours of service operation are from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. And then the afternoon service, it would go from 12 to 6 p.m. And that would capture the 2 coasters coming into the Poinsettia Station at 7:09 and 8:36 a.m. And the afternoon one would cover the 3:43 p.m. leaving the coaster station, and also 5:21 p.m. and 5:51 p.m. So, this is a pilot program. We do recognize that it's not going to cover everybody, and there will be some folks that, can't service them all, but we just want to be able to get a sense of, is there enough market demand to have an expanded service when it's full blown?
And Jewel, and just a little bit more onto that. So no matter where we end up in terms of the number of shuttles that we run, there's always going to be the case that we're going to have to try to figure out the implementation of an overlay type of opportunity for people. So one of the things we've talked about is looking at partnerships with Uber and Lyft to geofence an area. And so that people can get a discounted trip directly to the coaster station within those areas. So that's another piece of this that we're going to be looking at doing. But like they said, this is kind of the pilot, and represents truly an expansion in terms of the frequencies. And as we build capacity, we would love to be in the case. We would love it to be the case that we would add more frequencies to this, but we need to learn first with this, and then we can grow the program. But the other piece is that there will be a need for an overlay program.
Okay, well, I'm actually excited about this. I think it's a great program, and I hope that it does expand. And maybe if we don't see the ridership goals that we would hope for, that maybe there would be outreach to employers to look to see. I know a number of them are on shift kind of employment in that location, in that Carlsbad strip, because you have a lot of tech companies that maybe provide call centers and that sort of activity. So it would be great to get everybody there.
And including those with a reverse commute, those originating in Carlsbad and moving down, we've examined that, and that's something we could look into for the future potentially.
Terrific, thank you. And then do you know what the cost of, after that 30 days, what the cost of the shuttle will, or on-demand ride service will move to?
Well, if someone gets a 30-day free coaster pass and then they're using the rideshare service, what we hope is that they'll then buy their own annual coaster pass. They'll continue to be able to ride the on-demand rideshare service complimentary.
Oh, great.
If they don't end up becoming a regular coaster rider, then right now we've been looking at kind of a $2.50 one-way fare for the on-demand service,
Okay, thank you.
comparable to the bus.
Board Member McNamara.
Thank you. I kind of view this a little bit as an experiment. And usually when you have an experiment, you have a hypothesis and you have some sort of an expected outcome. And so I'm looking at the performance metrics, and I don't really see a lot of those there. So, I mean, I see there you have a task that we're going to do performance, but I'm wondering if you say, for example, 26% of drive-alone commuters would prefer taking an on-demand ride-share service. So if 26 represents 26 out of 100, you're able to measure how many of those actually take the on-demand ride-share service, or you're going to measure a reduction in greenhouse gases? I mean, how do you know if the thing works?
So I think
That's kind of where I'm kind of going with this. At the end of this year, what are we looking at to know that this worked or didn't work?
So I think the starting point was they laid out for NCTD is it's increasing coaster riders, and they identified 100 new coaster riders average added to the average weekday, which is a significant boost. So that's kind of the metric that we're using from an NCTD point of view. We also, and it's not documented in here, are looking at this from a cost effectiveness perspective in terms of comparing it with our fixed route services that we have that try to mirror this type of service, as well as other types of services, maybe even through our flex model. So we do have the benchmark metrics. We didn't put it in this specific presentation, but they are around cost effectiveness and ridership.
So we're looking next year, goal is decrease ridership on the coaster by 100 people.
Right.
Which ideally would take 100 cars off the road.
No, so average weekday is adding average weekday of 100. So that doesn't equate to exactly 100 new customers. That would equate to roughly, if it could be 50 customers taking a round trip ticket.
Okay. So you'll have all this, right?
Yes.
Right. Be able to see it, be really obvious whether it worked or not. Okay.
Board Member Desmond.
Are you done?
I am. I think I am.
Didn't want to jump
Johnny
the gun there. What pot of money is this coming out of NCTD? And then I guess also for Sandag.
So we are planning to use bus operating funds in FY20. So through the flex.
So it's going to be approved if assume you adopt the FY20 budget. It's within the FY20 budget in the bus operations department.
So the bus, okay, and that's to run these new whatever.
Yes.
Mobile Go or whatever they call it. I forgot already. So that's coming out. Yeah. How about Sandag? Do you know where that money's coming out of?
We had all of our 200K in the approved FY19 budget, most of which we're carrying over to FY20, and that money was specifically a line item for Mobility Hub pilots and implementation.
Was that Transnet or do you know?
Not Transnet, it's all state DMV vehicle registration fees, also known as call box funds.
Okay. Oh, it's a call. Okay. All right. And then I guess, well, I guess more to what Mayor McNamara was suggesting. Is there a cost recovery target for this? It seems like we're going to have to pay for buses or some sort of organization that's going to, was it MoveGo?
Right.
Rideco. Okay, Rideco, they're going to have to pay for Rideco and I guess that's going to be contracted out?
Yes. So Rodco, we're essentially using the contract vehicle that the city of Carlsbad is executing, and Sandag is piggybacking with that. So that's the contractual provision. For us, in terms of looking at and evaluating this from a cost point of view, again, I look at these last mile connections as part of that full coaster cost. So for us, when we look at the metric, we're going to try to look at a metric that typically for these trips, we want the trip cost to be under $10 for that person.
For that person, but I mean, what's the cost? So let's say it costs us $30 per person.
Well, no.
And
I'm saying the trip cost in terms of what Rodco is charging.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at that metric to be under $10 or less.
Okay. For NCTD's cost, it's $10 or less.
Less for that trip.
For that trip. Okay.
Yes.
So, and do we?
Because this is an add-on to already existing costs associated with providing coaster.
Yes.
So that's what we're looking at is that metric. Now, of course, we're going to have to look to see exactly what the distance that people are actually traveling. But from a practical point of view, we want to be kind of in that $10 per passenger cost.
Okay, so I guess that would be another metric to maybe measure at the end. And then can people go, let's say, go outside of that 5 mile distance on RideGo?
There's going to be a specified service area hovering between or centering on the Poinsettia Carlsbad Station and the eastern end of the Carlsbad employment area.
Is that 5 miles or whatever?
Approximately.
Approximately
A little
5
bit
miles.
over.
Okay, so you can't get somebody that's a rogue rider that wants to go 10 miles inland or something like that. Well, yeah, but that.
I'll mention that as part of the midday trip offering, we are including the Carlsbad Village as a potential destination for those midday trips.
Okay,
So
and
we're
then
still defining the exact service area, but that's roughly what it is.
and then on the morning ones that you talked about, the morning coasters, are they coming all from north? Where are they coming? One coming from the north, one coming from the south, or how's that?
Both are northbound coasters in the morning, and
Both
all
are
three are
northbound.
southbound coasters in the afternoon. And so right now, we're looking at that target population of commuters that are destined for Carlsbad employment from the south.
From the south. So,
For
okay,
this initial pilot.
all right.
Yeah, and the reason we're not looking at it from the north, we did look at that. The distance didn't seem to make sense in terms of timing. It would just, people wouldn't get onto Oceanside, go to Poinsettia and then take another trip. Like it was just going to be too long of a trip distance for it to be feasible for them. So we wanted to really focus on the low hanging fruit of folks that could see a reduction in their commute.
Okay, well, I guess piggyback on Mr. Drucker and San Marcos, the comment, the Sprinter, Sprinter goes to the Oceanside and then another stop or two down to Poinsettia. I don't know, it might be efficient, but you're not even, that's not included in this part.
So we did think about that, but again, we looked at the total trip time and thought and analyzed that and said, that's going to be way too long for somebody right now. And it's a pilot, let's hone in on what's going to be a reduction in trip time and not that much more. Because we even looked at going from Oceanside into the business park, and that was going to be about a 30-minute ride, which it didn't make sense. Like why would somebody do that if they can just do that in their car?
Okay, thanks.
I mean, it points to an issue of maybe thinking ahead to major roadways and how do we maybe dedicate or allocate space to these pooled solutions so they do have priority. Otherwise, that rideshare vehicle is going to sit in the same traffic as anyone else getting from Oceanside down. So to think about Sprinter to East Carlsbad connections as being a 25-ish minute trip, it's not going to be attractive. It's not going to be attractive.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure it's been quite the long ride. So no pun intended. So really quick question, a couple of questions. So one would be, I know that we mentioned micromobility and the bike share pilot for North County. Carlsbad's not participating in that. And I know right now we're just looking at mobility on demand vehicles. In terms of when we decide to venture outside of that, what types of other options are we looking at versus just the shuttles right now?
Well, the three North County coastal cities, Del Mar, Solana Beach, and Encinitas, are contracting with one vendor, Gotcha, as you know, or you may know. So to start, it's going to be electric assist bikes. None of the cities are expressing any interest in electric kick scooters. Gotcha, that bike share vendor, also offers a neighborhood electric vehicle rideshare service, a low speed, 5-passenger shuttle service. So that could be a potential option. They've also invented their own classification of trike. It's a motorized 3-wheeled solution that's a lot sturdier than a kick scooter. So that's kind of in their suite of mobility offerings, so to speak. And that could be something that all 5 of the cities could explore beyond just the electric bike share.
Great, thank you. And then one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is how do we happen to have a number of individuals that we know that live in North County that also work in North County? I've been trying to get that number. I'd love to hear if you have looked at that, just because I'm trying to understand our ridership and really looking at, do we have San Diego residents that are frequenting up here? I mean, that would be my guess, but I just want to understand from the North County perspective what that looks like.
So we've looked at that specifically through our land use study. So we looked at LEHD census data. So I can provide a memo that has that information, but we have that through our land use study.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd love to see that, just because it would be interesting to just understand how we're alleviating North County's problem, and then obviously how it kind of expands to the rest of the county. And then just a clarification, what do you mean by virtual stops for flexible routes? I know you mentioned that, but we didn't really go into it. So could you expand on that a bit?
So stops that aren't at set locations, in terms of every day there being only those stops available for people to hail a ride. There's going to be kind of a population or a set of potential stops, and depending on how the demand looks, certain stops will be available to match up with the ride hail demand. So more robust than where you see Breeze stops currently, but flexible, changing, on-demand, dynamic, day to day. I think we're gonna start with a certain set with Rideco, and then potentially add on based on how much demand we see based on the 4 vehicles.
So it would be based on frequency.
Based on frequency,
Okay.
and thinking about a situation similar to how you may already hail an Uber pool, where it will ask you to walk maybe 150 meters to that stop, but it could change day to day.
Okay, great. And I think I have just one last question. Oh no, I think you answered it. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Board Member Franklin, you still have a question?
So to confirm, we're talking 100 trips, not 100 riders. So 50 riders, assuming they're gonna get there and go home, right?
That's under that assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So follow me. I'm not a mathematician, and it's never been my strong suit. But I just looked on Uber. I can schedule a ride on Uber for $11.47, scheduled to pick me up at 5:10 p.m. at Viasat and take me to the Poinsettia station. Okay. Now, 1147 times 2 trips a day times 100. So I was going with the first assumption to be 100 riders times 5 days a week times 52 weeks in the year. That's 596,000, but that's twice the number that we're talking about. So we're only talking about 50 riders. So we have that, we get to $298,000. So it's $298,000 to Uber all these people to and from the Sprinter station to get to Viasat. Am I the only one that looks at that and says, why don't we save $200,000 by just giving these people the money to ride Uber? I mean, where's the flaw in my thinking?
I can tell you what a flaw is.
Please.
And it's not a flawed thought, but first, the business model that we're implementing is essentially the Uber business model. And so we've, in this particular case, what we're talking about is very much going out to RIDECO, which is within the transportation network company sphere. And so it's pretty much the same type of business model that you would see in Uber, Lyft type of service being provided. That's why when I was asked a question about in terms of the cost, that we're looking at that metric, but we're also looking at partnerships with Uber and Lyft so that within the geofenced areas, customers would be able to do this. Now, obviously,
Part of this program?
it's going to be not part of this program separately. We're looking to do that. But the other piece of it is, understand from the RIDECO is if we can get 5 people, 10 people in that same vehicle, that we're actually able to lower that cost unit even more. So we're intending to do both of what you just talked about. The RIDECO, getting more people to ride in one vehicle, and having the options for people to be able to individually select into Uber, Lyft, or any other TNC.
So here's the thing though, as soon as you said 12 passenger vehicle, I, as a potential customer, immediately tuned out. Okay. Because I don't want to be in a 12 passenger vehicle. Why? Because I'm assuming that you're going to make as many as 10 other stops unless, and there's just 2 parts to what I want to say here. With Viasat, and I don't know if we're already doing this. I mean, we should just be at Viasat. We should just post up there and not leave until they agree to let us subsidize a bus that goes back and forth from Viasat to the coaster station, because there's got to be a huge number. I mean, I don't know what their employment base is. Somebody knows. It's tens of thousands of people working there now in Carlsbad. So what I'm saying is, are there other major employment center magnets that we could just do a dedicated? But here's the thing about the Uber. Uber that's based on the cost of one person per vehicle that goes directly where they want to go. Doesn't stop anywhere else along the way. You save another about $3 if you were to do a pool. Okay, I didn't do the math on that. It was like $8.48 for a pool. So if you're pooling, which is 1 or 2 other passengers, now you're a couple of bucks cheaper. If you charge another $250 fare box recovery, now you're down in a $5 range. Now you're down in wildly cheaper. And here's the kicker. The kicker is it goes exactly where I want, and more important, it goes when I want at every time of the day, 24 hours a day, 365. There's no issue of maybe it takes me where I want to go for lunch. Maybe it gets me there at the time. I'm just saying, like, I think the last mile problem, especially for a lot of people who are working people, and these employment centers in Carlsbad, these are affluent people. So we're not just, I mean, we're competing against a comfortable and quick way to work in their own personal vehicle. I think we can match a lot of that by starting. I never understand why government wants to reinvent the wheel when there's a solution that exists now that we can invest in. That I don't see the mathematical case here. We could take the 300,000, give it directly to these folks, and then they get to go when they want, where they want. Like, I can't. And then when we finally get the problem of autonomous vehicles solved, which, by the way, we're all on the mailing list, and every time the train hits somebody, I mean, transit is not a mode of transportation that is free from fatalities. So, I mean, I know this is completely off the wall, but I'm going to say it anyway. Everybody's afraid of autonomous vehicles because the technology is not perfected and people are going to get hurt. The problem is transportation hurts people. It does. Cars hurt people, buses hurt people, trains hurt people. We don't want it to. We want it to be zero. We want zero people to be hurt. But if we measure the risks, what I'm really saying is, why are we not here with a pioneering project to have an autonomous vehicle technology? Or, where are we involved in that technology and being on the leading edge of it? But even if it's not autonomous, leveraging existing rideshare infrastructure rather than trying to recreate it or going through a contractor that says 12 passenger van, because how many people are like me and they're going to tune out the second they hear 12 passengers? It's just, I mean, have you been in a 12 passenger van lately?
Well, they're getting off of a train that has, several hundred passengers. So I appreciate your point of view. But at this particular project,
van lately, because I have one thing to be on a train. I love to ride the train.
Yeah.
But to get on a 12 passenger van is not the same thing. It's
Well,
not the same environment.
I'm not afraid of the autonomous vehicle, and I hope I'm on the board when we get the chance to pilot a program with an autonomous vehicle. But for now, we've got a project here that we're looking at, and I appreciate your noodling and your ideas, but at this point, we're headed on it.
Sure, and before I explain that, I also want to remind folks that we did do an RFP process and we got different submittals from different folks. One of the reasons why we are looking at RideCo over another different option is because we also wanted to look at GHG reductions, and doing only Lyft or Uber would not necessarily help achieve those goals. Uber was not somebody who responded to the RFP either. And we also wanted to look at something that we could do branding around and in trying to make that connection between the reduction in single vehicle occupancy trips and to hopefully transferring them to transit ridership. So those were some of the overarching goals that we were looking at. With RideCo, do you want to explain them, or should I?
No, I mean, just to add that we also have a starting list of 50 target employers where we're going to be marketing the service to. That as a starting point helps to warrant the larger vehicles, because we feel like there's going to be that much demand, at least by filling the vehicles half full at the initial start of the pilot. And to Claudia's point about using Uber or Lyft, hailing a ride so that you're driven by yourself to your destination just unfortunately doesn't do anything to reduce the VMT or meet VMT or GHG reduction targets, which our agencies are tasked to do. So we're trying to find the best fit while also making it on-demand dynamic service that's hip with the technology and really door-to-door while connecting to an existing great trunk line transit service, which is the Coaster.
Seems like if you get people to adopt it and they have a 30-mile commute and 20 miles of it is now not in their own car, but on the train, you've eliminated 2/3 of their greenhouse gas emission. But the question is, did you get them to adopt this as their ordinary mode of transportation to work?
Good question. Okay, Board Member Jenkins.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea and visionary to try to see if what the success can be with this. I have a couple of questions. So let's say we're 6 months into the program and it's either not going as planned or it's much more successful than planned. Do we adjust the program at all, or do we just add vans, decrease vans, or do we just stay the course for the 12-month pilot?
Yeah, we'll definitely be monitoring all the way through. Initially, of course, every week we'll be checking ridership, and then of course every month throughout the pilot. If it's thriving and we see a lot more demand than we initially planned for, we're going to reach out to some of those key employers who, especially maybe like Viasat or Thermo Fisher, maybe want a dedicated type of van to find out if they're at all interested in helping to subsidize the service. It's not going to thrive or be sustained with just public subsidies alone. We already recognize that. So we're going to try to see how we can partner with those employers, especially since they've expressed an interest in this service. And there are employees of these companies that do want to try riding the Coaster, just so that they can get things done on their commute up. And they want to do it. They just don't see that there's an adequate connection from Coaster Station to the end. And even if they did start riding the Coaster to then have to pay for an Uber, that's an additional expense that they need to pay for out of their own pocket, as opposed to having it be covered fully by the pilot program.
And do some of these companies already have a rideshare program from the Coaster to their business, or no?
We're not aware of any.
Okay.
They have some carpooling that may happen from
Right.
different locations in the county to their places, but we have been meeting with some of our key employers through our sustainable mobility plan process around that. So we have been doing some initial outreach, and this is also part of our talent attraction and employer retention program, because some employers have shared with us that retaining employees and retaining them is an issue when it comes to commuting times.
Okay, and then my next comment is more a comment than a question. This is just pertaining to Carlsbad at this point. I know on page 1 you have about the bike on Sprinter demand, that is something you're exploring down the road, correct?
That first slide was just a list of all the brainstorm opportunities we initially started with in late 2018. And
Okay.
So far, this Poinsettia Coaster pilot is the first to be shepherded forward.
Okay, so if that gets going further down the road, I guess my one comment would be when you look at that, I would not start it in the middle of the school year because people get their, have their transportation plan and it's hard to change that. So if you get to that point and look at that, I think you should make sure it starts well before the school year so they can get on track with that and would be more likely to participate than throwing it out there in the middle of the year.
Right, and we've had some preliminary conversations with CSU San Marcos who
Okay.
expressed the same thing,
Yeah.
so we're on the same page.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Edson, another quick question?
Yes, thank you. I had a couple things I wanted to mention. You addressed Gotcha and the three North County city pilot. Gotcha presented to the Solana Beach City Council this past Wednesday. Excuse me. And we are very interested in their shuttle service. So we've asked staff to further examine that. But it would probably be limited, at this point, either to just our community if the other two cities don't jump in, or to the three cities. So it wouldn't take it outside. I was interested in the determining factors of which cities this might move to in the future, because I noticed that Encinitas is being considered for expansion before June of 2020. But if it's a 5-mile commute, there's the whole High Bluff high employment area that is probably within, I'm quite sure, 5 miles of the kind of dividing line between Solana Beach and Del Mar, or even from our Solana Beach station. So that might be something to consider as well, especially with one Paseo going in. That's that many more people that might be using it. Demographics, I was just in a marketing, sales planning, and business development meeting just right before this, and there was a lot of discussion about the demographics of actually riders on the coaster. And these are choice riders, and they do have money, and they are choosing to get out of their cars and to take public transit. So I think they will actually embrace the fact that they can perhaps get in a shuttle and get the rest of the way to work. So I think that's good. And it may even be saving people money who are now hopping in an Uber or a Lyft, and reducing the GHG as well. I love the thought about autonomous vehicles, but while the technology exists for the vehicles, the infrastructure does not yet exist in the roads to allow them to work in the stretch that you're looking for your pilot. And so maybe that's a future pilot. Thank you.
Good. Board Member Franklin.
So when the funding for the pilot expires, and I'm a person who's taking the connector here, at that point, the subsidy's gone. Are you going to look for us to renew permanent funding, or am I going to begin to pay a fare at that point that recovers the cost?
I mean, from the get-go, we'll be marketing it as a one-year pilot.
Mhm.
In parallel, both Carlsbad, Sandag, and NCTD will be exploring opportunities to pool together additional funding while also approaching employers for some private subsidies. So at this point, we don't have any answers for solid potential new sources, but that, in addition to the mobility on demand pilot that Katie mentioned, is a potential opportunity to secure some federal funding as well.
We're also going to be looking at the data analytics of the ridership and see its success. And the RideCo will also be looking to provide a report on potential financing options for future service beyond the pilot program.
And I wanted to piggyback a couple of things. One, I'm going to send out a link that will allow you to be able to independently take a look at RideCo's website and see what types of services and type of technologies they bring to the table. This truly is a private sector company. I would describe this as a better Uber and Lyft, because they are actually cost recovering and not living off of Wall Street. So that's kind of number one. From a second piece, for NCTD, if this model proves successful, we will be expanding it within our existing budget, because this would be a trade-off between existing fixed route service and a much more cost-effective first and last mile solution. One of the reasons that we advanced the fare increases, because particularly on the coaster side, was because we recognize the need that we need to make sure that people are able to have a complete trip. And it is kind of important for us to be able to answer the questions about how do I get there day to day? Because from a truthful point of view, you know, no one is going to live off of Uber and Lyft for every one of these trips, paying $12 to $15 per trip. No one's going to do that per day. And so we're going to have to come up with a solution that gives them the flexibility and options. And that's what we should be talking about in terms of transportation. How do we give people options so that they can make choices that are in their best interest? That's what this is attempting to do. So if this is successful, we're going to continue to try to expand it within the existing footprint of our budget, because it actually would represent a cost savings to the district.
Board Member Duker.
Yep. So basically, I'm excited about this project. It makes a whole lot of sense. Backing up what Jewel said, it would be interesting if we could get something going from Solana Beach down to Carmel Valley. One Paseo actually is on the hook for some type of shuttle service from One Paseo to Solana Beach train station. So that would be interesting. The other thing is Delmar had a presentation on Gotcha. I would strongly urge you to look at Gotcha for San Marcos, because really the way Gotcha made all this money was by providing bikes to universities. And that's really where they got started, and that's really where it's worked best. Because if you think of it, you go to take the bike, you go to a place on campus, and then somebody else takes that bike and goes somewhere else, etc. It's a closed loop. I am skeptical about Gotcha in terms of biking from Del Mar to Encinitas, but we'll see what happens. But when you've got a closed loop, that would make sense, and it would be something that, again, would make sense for you all to look at in terms of San Marcos. So if you'd like, I'd do a motion to approve Exhibit A and approve the memorandum of understanding.
All right, and a second from, okay, we got a motion by Board Member Drucker and a second by Board Member Edson.
We already voted.
Okay. On the motion of Board Member Dave Juker, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve agenda item number 13. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes. Board members Desmond and Franklin vote no.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to informational items. There are 4 of them, and looks like Katie's up again for item number 14, update on land use and transit integration study.
All right, so Debbie is here from IBI to provide an update on our land use and transit integration study. We last gave an update at the February board retreat. So Debbie will specifically address kind of the work that we have done since then. And those tasks specifically include our land use and transit connectivity analysis, as well as some initial results from our most recent round of public outreach. And then we will be returning to the board in July to provide another update on this study, as well as go over the scope and timeline of our strategic multimodal transit implementation plan.
And good afternoon. Okay, so just a quick little reminder, we are doing this study in support with HDR and CityWorks. Just going to go through these real quick. And just as a reminder, these are our 8 project objectives that will be shaping the strategies that I'll share in just a little bit here. The other 4 strategies here. And here's our schedule, just to give you some context here. We're in we just completed our task 4, entering our task 5 tasks. And we're focused here on looking at strategies for implementation. And we'll be going into our capital strategies and our greenhouse gas emissions analyses as part of task 5 as well.
So just some recent and current activities here. So we had our latest technical working group meeting in March. We completed our task for transit and land use connectivity analysis. And as Katie mentioned, we conducted some public outreach, did some pop-ups at a couple of locations throughout North County in late April and early May, and I'll touch on those in just a little bit as well. We also have an online survey currently open until the end of the month. I'll go into more detail on these in just a moment, but I just wanted to share with you our task for land use and connectivity analysis. So the purpose of this part of the study was to look at multimodal connectivity and identify areas where transit is disconnected from land uses and key destinations. And the way we looked at that, our approach was looking at a multimodal connectivity analysis, a focused land use analysis, looked at affordable housing and points of interest, which some came from our technical working group, and as well as looking at parcel opportunities for redevelopment. And I'll go through each of these in just a moment. So, here we go. So you'll see here, this is the entire service area, and I'm talking about the multimodal shed analysis at this point. So this looked at different modes of transport and how far you can get within that shed for that mode of transport. So the red that you'll see here is the walk shed, and that was a 5-minute walk. The orange is a bike ride, bike shed with a 15-minute bike ride. And you'll see, it's hard to see here, but the dark blue is an e-scooter, and that's a 10-minute e-scooter ride. And then we had e-bike here on here as well, and that's a turquoise, and that's a 15-minute e-bike ride. So what all these sheds represent is that how far you can access the service area from any transit stop or station in the county based on these different modes. So we did the same analysis, multimodal shed analysis, looking just at the rail and high frequency transit stations. As you'll see, there's a lot less color here on this map. So the gray is where there's no multimodal shed access, as you can see. So we wanted to see all transit stations as well as just the rail and high frequency. So this is an example of our land use analysis. By the way, we did all the multimodal shed analyses on the previous 2 slides, and these analyses for each of the jurisdictions as well. So for the land use analysis here, we looked at corridors and focus areas and parceled out the land uses along those corridors and focus areas. So this is an example from San Marcos. And looking at that same example, I mentioned earlier parcel opportunities. So this is looking at infill and redevelopment opportunities along those corridors and focus areas, looking at city-owned land, and as well as looking at surface parking that had potential for redevelopment. That's what this map shows. And just as a reminder, we presented these to you before at the February board retreat, but these are the focus areas, the 9 corridors, and then the 10 focus areas here that we're looking at for this particular study. And just to note here that this does not include all the TOD potential areas for all of North County, but just that these are the ones that we're focusing on. These are the ones that we've identified that have both physical and policy opportunities for TOD. So we decided to focus on these. And this is just a map of the corridors and the focus areas that you just saw. So going back to our public outreach, you've seen this before as well, but we've gone out to our technical working group a number of times. We just went out recently in March, and we'll go back one more time in the summer. And then just to highlight here again, going back out to the public in summer as well. And then I'll go right here into the outreach that we did just recently in late April, early May. So we held 3 pop-up events for the public at Oceanside Sunset Market, Carlsbad Village Station, and Escondido Transit Center. We had participants that came up to the pop-up fill out a survey on an iPad. And so those numbers that you see behind each of those locations are the number of surveys that we had people take in person there during the 2-hour pop-up event. So for those participants that were not able to take the survey at that point, it was about a 5-minute survey. We had them take away cards with survey links on them to take with them onto the coaster or wherever they were going. And also for participants that didn't have quite enough time for the survey or were waiting to take the survey, we had them participate. You'll see the picture on the very right side. We had these strategy boards that showed each of the 6 strategies that I'll mention to you in just a moment. We had them prioritize with this kind of a sticker exercise, prioritizing which strategies they liked the most, their top 3 out of the 6. So I'll go and introduce each of the strategies again. You've seen some of these before at the February board retreat, but it's been a couple of months. So the way I'll introduce it is that these charts that you'll see here are the survey results just from the initial public outreach for the pop-ups. We still have the online survey open until the end of the month. So there will be additional survey results that come from that. So just keep that in mind. So the first of our 6 strategies is the technology-based strategy. So this is looking at integrating technology into demand-based services, such as mobility as a service. And just to highlight some of the survey results here, participants that were a part of the survey really liked the idea of universal payment and journey planning apps. And then also real-time traveler information was very important to them. And you also see in relation to the previous presentation, their demand for mobility on demand and TNCs as a first last mile solution was interesting. So, okay, and then for the technology-based strategy, for each strategy, I'll introduce the quarters and the focus areas that we are planning on recommending applying each strategy to. So these are the quarters and focus areas that you saw earlier in the presentation. As you know, technology-based strategies can be pretty broad, so they can be applied to a number of different corridors and focus areas. And we're looking here specifically at areas where, particularly like in Fallbrook, where fixed service might be not as frequent, where technology might help address some of those issues. And then the TDM strategy is next, so transportation demand management. This one is focused on creating connections to other counties and focused on easing some of those long commuting issues. So people were very interested in employer partnerships with subsidies from their employers for taking alternative forms of transit other than the single occupancy vehicle. Also, a lot of interest for shared transit park and ride lots. We have some of those along the I-15 corridor currently that are operating. And then some mild interest in electric vehicle charging, carpool, vanpool, priority parking, and designated the PUDO, the pickup drop-off at transit stations. That would be for like the Uber, Lyfts, and TNCs. So for the TDM strategy, again, this is quite a broad strategy. So we've recommended it for a number of corridors and focus areas. And as I go through this, you'll see that there are a number of the focus areas correspond to those corridors or are adjacent to those corridors. So the next one is the active transportation strategy. And as you can imagine, it's identifying first last mile strategies and making recommendations for bike and pedestrian facilities. And this is recommended particularly for areas that have an existing or known or anticipated pedestrian and bike traffic. So folks thought that better bike infrastructure and pedestrian facilities were important to those areas. And these are the corridors and focus areas that we're recommending. Okay. The next one is the commuter bus strategy. So this is where we identify corridors where express service could link to key employment and activity centers. And you'll see for these next couple of ones that people thought these are related factors, but peak hour service frequency, service connections, and inter-county connections are all extremely important and valuable to them. So given the type of service that we have here in North County. And these are the commuter bus strategy is recommended to be applied to the corridors and focus areas here. Particularly, you'll see on the eastern portion of the service area in the I-15 and the Vista Escondido areas. So the rapid BRT strategy, this is pretty similar to the commuter strategy, but this focuses on areas or corridors with high ridership demand and density opportunities. And this is also a strategy where we might explore the autonomous bus vehicles in the future. So again, you'll see here that all of these criteria are all very important to all the people that participated in our survey so far. And then the rapid BRT strategy, in particular, I like to highlight the Palomar Airport San Marcos corridor. So that's an area that, as you well know, has a lot of employment, also has a lot of congestion. So with that being said, with a rapid BRT implementation, it might help create the most benefit for that congestion in terms of having like a dedicated BRT lane and having the most density to ride that BRT as well. Also, the El Camino Real is a nice north-south corridor that is parallel to the I-5. So that's a great avenue for BRT as well. The rail strategy, last one here, is so this strategy looks at corridors that might be ideal for conversion to rail in the future. So while we're not sure exactly how we might want to do that, but we do want to look at BRT strategies and BRT corridors that might have some potential for conversion to rail in the future. So those that have high ridership and high density that might not be adequately served by BRT in the future. So this would be a long-term strategy. And again, the increased service coverage, service frequency, and rider experience are also very important aspects to that rail strategy. And again, last slide here on the strategies. These are the corridors that we would potentially look at. And this is where there's currently existing or anticipated high frequency BRT or high frequency bus service, I should say. And then again, this is just preliminary from just our pop-up public outreach surveys. So the top preferred strategy was actually rails. And then the second most popular strategy was technology-based. So people saw a lot of potential in those. And then just as our next steps, and then we'll open it up for questions, our next technical working group meeting and final working group meeting will be in June, early July to talk about our draft report, draft recommendations. We'll finalize those strategy recommendations and we'll conduct our capital strategies and greenhouse gas emissions analysis as well with our sub HDR. And then we'll have a final round of upcoming public outreach in July and August, and that'll be hopefully combined with our SimTip strategic multimodal effort in the future. So I'll turn it over to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll kick off questions with Vice Chair Feller.
So I see on here focus areas, Mission and Canyon. Is there something on that corner that I don't know about? Because I know that area pretty well. Is there a plan?
So I believe that one is, so let me backtrack a little bit and just say that this analysis was done, that particular analysis was done with a parametric analysis. So what they did, our modelers did, was take the entire service area and kind of parse it out into a number of, I think it was like half-mile hexagons. So, and kind of, we had to name it something. So within that area, there is potential for TOD. So perhaps there's, and I don't remember exactly for that particular intersection, but it's around that intersection that there's maybe service parking for redevelopment or it's near transit. And there's potential for infill. So that's why it's identified as a TOD area.
Well, you're using it as a focus area for several things. And does it have something to do with the school district?
Well, no. So the starting premise of this is a lot of this is forward looking in terms of potential areas for development and implementation of expanded transit services. And so for us, this is kind of the starting point. I think Board Member Battelle had a comment earlier about understanding the nature of where are folks North County going, but we've been looking at both inflows and outflows from all of the different areas. So that's kind of the primary purpose. And then within North County, we started looking at pockets for potential development that are transit supportive and what types of services can be provided in the future based upon different scenarios that may play out from a land use. So the land use study is really going to be a document at the end is going to be handed off to you all as cities to help you in your land use plans and decision making about how we're going to shape transit in the future. So think about this more so as a future forward looking piece. To bring this home, we do intend to go to every city and provide a presentation and focus in pretty much on your city to engage you in the discussion about your existing land use, and the potential areas that we're identifying, so that you can then engage with us about what you're planning to do with that from a future point of view. So this is not intended to say this is what service we're going to operate at this location, or this is what we're going to do in this corridor. The follow-on study that was identified, the Strategic Multimodal Transit Implementation Plan, I got it right, is going to really look at things like cell phone data to understand travel patterns, so that we could design services really for the next 5 years, but then also give us a point, or with the overlay with this land use, about what types of possibilities are available from long-range transit planning point of view. So this is really about us now taking a look at the existing and planned land use in the future.
It's a high volume corridor already. There are probably the underserved living close by that probably work, but as far as future development, unless you know something I don't know, there's not much room there. The school district's land, unless they give that up, you know.
Not all about development. So this study has lots of different prongs. So part of it is identifying areas for potential development type activities, but a lot of it is just identifying where you may have population bases that are transit supportive, or you have the opportunity to continue to refine the land use. So I see what you're saying, Jack. So I think it's just, this study is multi-layered. And so it's more so about planning towards the future and making sure that our cities understand you're going to be making decisions that will impact the types of transit services that you provide that we can provide in the future.
Thank you. And the last thing is, when are you going to do those presentations?
So we're completing our first quarterly round with cities. And so for the next presentation, it's going to be the study. And so when we get into the second quarter presentation, so there have been a few cities we've already touched. And so on the next presentations with those cities would be the land use focused presentation.
Thank you.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you. No worries. So thank you so much for the presentation. Really quick question on what are we using to define or identify disadvantaged, and then what particular, how are we reaching those particular areas?
So I can double check, but it was like census data or like a household survey type of data, and I can certainly look that up, that exact source, and get back to you. But it was data that was already available, so it wasn't something that we did separately and gathered, but it just was data that was already available.
Yeah, that would be interesting to me, just to understand, and then also to really understand how we're actually reaching those, because I know that's a goal. So just to understand what we're doing to reach that particular demographic would be really helpful, and just understanding what the definition is would be helpful as well. And then one of the questions, this is just my researcher brain going off. I know that we did the questionnaires and we went out and did outreach. How many, what did that number look like in terms of how many people did we actually get? So I saw that we hit 85 people in terms of in terms of seeing them in person, but with the online surveys, what did that number look like?
So the online survey is actually the same one that people took at the pop-up events.
Okay.
So those are the numbers that we're showing just from the pop-up outreach. So we had the online survey ongoing as well. So people that took away those little cards with the survey links, they would complete the online survey as well. So that's still open until May 31st. So we don't have those results quite yet.
Okay. Do we have a number right now, like a rough number as to how many people have participated?
It's just over, I think last I checked, I think yesterday, like close to like 150, something like that.
Okay.
So, but again, it's still open for a while. So, and then just wanted to let you know as well, it was on the slide, but we've sent emails specifically out to employers as well, encouraging them to forward that email to their employees to take that, and also to a few community organizations.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a few follow-up questions regarding that. So are we in terms of how people are participating, clearly that's a low number. If we are to use a percentage of the people that are writing, anywhere on NCTD, and it's not, obviously it's not you all, it's just the motivation to want to participate in a survey, right? So my question to you is, what's the cost of having people to have to go out and administer? And then how can we actually look to potentially, and I don't know if this is feasible or not, but providing maybe an option to incentivize where it's either like, this could be, hey, if you take it, you get entered into some sort of raffle. I don't know if that's even possible. I'm just thinking out loud here. And then, or, hey, if you take this survey, you get like half off or like a quarter off or whatever it is, your ticket, because then we're getting actual generalizable data versus just like a handful of people that actually want to participate. So that's where I'm looking in terms of getting this feedback. Like we can say that we have this information, but if it's just 150 people, I would be a little concerned on just taking that information and then running with it.
Yeah, so I appreciate what you're saying. I would still put it back in a different context that this is just going to give us a toolbox of different options. And so in fact, as they broke them out, ranging from, the transportation demand management strategy down to a rail strategy, when we refine it down to an actual service plan, that's a separate level of planning study and detail study and public input where we really do have to drill down. And so for me, it would not be a big return on investment to go out and do it for this particular study, because the primary premise for this study, the underlying pieces for us, was really getting to understand exactly what were the travel patterns, inflows and outflows within this region. What is the land use that exists within this region? What are the opportunities to shape the future? And really creating more of a toolbox for our cities to understand.
But do you believe that, and I'm going to push back a little bit and ask, do you believe that that handful of people would be able to help with that strategy and vision is my question.
So the point that I'm making, even though those people might have taken a survey and said they like this strategy versus that strategy, we're not taking any strategy off of the table. So essentially when they're giving us that information in those corridors, but at the point that we are from a planning point of view, this is just a high level planning study. That's a totally different level in terms of how we start setting up for a specific service plan, which would require much more detailed planning and analysis around this. So I understand public feedback and desire for different transportation options. It's an important thing, but that's not the primary purpose of this study. The strategic multimodal implementation improvement transportation plan is going to do that. And we're going to capture tons of different data from people, from looking at cell phones to understand the travel patterns that people are taking, to surveying the public, having online. That's where we're going to be really focusing in to capture this. That's why these studies are so linked together. But I appreciate what you're saying, but the really important piece of this is all about understanding the commute patterns and understanding the land use that exists today and what opportunities we have in the future for land use.
Okay, and then just two extra points to that. I would be interested to hear how it goes in the next few months as we continue to do public outreach. It would be interesting to see, and I don't know if we're capturing this, what the demographic looks like of the individuals that have been participating, just to understand who is actually answering those questions and how is that shaping our strategy. And then lastly, I'm looking forward to hearing any feedback on whatever other surveys that we do put forward, because I think it's really important to make sure that it actually is generalizable and that it's not just a small segment of people that are participating. Thank you so much.
And just to
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just to add to that, I wanted to answer some of your specific questions. So I did want to add that it's just the survey is just one piece of the technical working group feedback, as well as the transit and land use connectivity analysis. So it's just one piece that's going into influencing the strategies. And also just to answer quickly some of your other questions, we did consider a raffle, but with the parameters, we couldn't actually offer a raffle that comes from NCTD. It had to be from another party. So we thought that might be confusing. And then also we went out with this as more of an education piece as well, educating people about the different types of strategies that NCTD is considering, not just only getting their input, but more sharing about what NCTD is doing as well.
Board Member Jenkins.
I have two questions. The working group, Who is the working group? Are they just NCTD people or city people or who?
So it's composed mostly of land use planners at the different cities, as well as we have the county as well. And we do have Orange County as participating and Riverside as well.
Okay. Okay. And I had the same thoughts as Priya about the numbers. It just seemed like they were kind of low for making a big decision, but she covered that. And then my other question was on several of these slides, you mentioned I-5 North. What do you consider I-5 North? I consider it from north of Escondido or, I'm sorry, 15.
So I-15.
15. Wrong freeway.
And then I go back to the map so I can show you real quick. So if you'll see that red line that goes all the way up, so we just named I-15 North as the area that's kind of past all the density. So and this was kind of in regards to the commuter strategies.
So I can't see that. Is that like to Temecula or what is that?
To Riverside County.
To Riverside County
Yeah,
line.
so it kind of goes from kind of Escondido north on the I-15.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Board member Edson.
Thank you. I had one question, and I understand the high levelness, and I thank Priya for her questions and that, I had the same concerns when I started hearing the numbers with the survey participants. And I also, from a marketing standpoint, think that if you provide some sort of carrot, we might get more feedback, whether that's raffle or, a free breeze ticket, for one day. That's a $2.50 kind of thing. But still, it might incentivize people. So there was a slide about draft recommendations with rapid and BRT strategy, and talked about the importance of the Palomar Airport San Marcos corridor. So my question is this how to get there a corridor that you're creating on current freeways or highways, or would this run down Palomar Airport Road in a more as the crow flies way to get from point A to point B versus that, kind of loop that's required in a car?
So it's not like a set route. I will say that it's more of it's like a corridor that we're looking at. So at this point, it would be more of an arterial versus a freeway. But that's still very, very high level. So it's something that would need to be delved into in later detail.
Okay, so Matt, for you, a question: do we have no rapids or BRTs on arterial streets? Is that correct? Right now, they're limited to freeways and highways?
Well, from a practical point of view, no, we don't. In terms of all of the features that really constitute bus rapid transit, we don't offer any of that today.
Okay, I do think that that's something worthy of investigating for the future, because if you can't get there faster on public transportation than in your car, there are going to be people who are just going to be willing to sit in their car, and that doesn't help reduce GHG. It doesn't help incentivize people to take public transit. So thank you.
Board member Desmond.
I think the best way to reduce GHG is get away from the combustion engine. Single occupancy drivers aren't the evil. But I have a question for you. I guess so. The technical work is Karen Brindley. Is she the chair of your technical working group?
No, I don't think she's participated in our group.
Okay, so I guess when you said it's all land, is it the county technical working group or just North County? Was it Jenkins had asked a similar question?
It's North County. It's our working group for this project.
And then County of San Diego also, they have some jurisdiction. They have some land here. So
who's
they're
on
also
the
participating.
North County technical working group?
So what she's alluding to is for this project, correct? We have a working group.
Yes.
And the working group includes representation from all of the cities, primarily land use planners coming in. And the county is also sending representation as part of the working group. So if you came in here a couple of times, you would see boards and things up, maps up, and you would see people representing the county and the different cities, including Orange County, looking at and providing input into this process.
Okay, so all right. I was kind of confused on that. So it's all the cities in North County plus the county weighing in on in the technical working group.
Yes.
Okay, and then
Yes, thank you.
on the multimodal sheds rail high frequency chart, page 9 is what I'm looking at here. Is there any differentiation between rail, between like the Sprinter versus the Amtrak and the Coaster? Because they're two different vehicle types, and I don't know. Do they each give the same weight?
No, no, and they're all different services designed, different types of services designed to accomplish different goals. The Sprinter is called a diesel multiple unit. The Sprinter service that was implemented on between Oceanside and Escondido was essentially operating almost as a light rail. I think so. Oh, you do. Okay. It essentially operates as a light rail system with mixed traffic, 15 station stops.
But I guess when you're looking at land use and things like that, and what's close and what's not close, when you're looking at like this rail and high frequency chart, is there? So it looks like to me that there's no real difference between the lighter rail and the heavier rail, as far as I guess any of the radiuses around there. To me, it would seem the heavier rail would have more reach or more people able to ride.
Well, obviously, if you're talking again, I want to keep saying that this is primarily a land use study and not a service plan study. And I think there's a little bit of confusion. This is not a service plan. So we're just looking at toolbox options. And so to be clear, for example, when we talk about the 15 corridor service from Riverside to Temecula, that would more so mirror like a coaster type service that would operate with limited stops. So it wouldn't be the case that you would plan that over 22 miles to have 15 station stops as an example.
Well, and the reason I'm bringing this up, I'm on the RENA committee, which has a technical working group, which, but on the RENA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment group, I mean, we're looking at where to put all the 171,000 houses between now and 2028. So in 9 years, where we're going to put these houses, and we're kind of looking at the same types of charts and things like that. And I'm having similar questions on heavy rail versus light rail and things like that. But it would appear that this multimodal rail and high frequency, right now we're coming up with strategies of, how much weight we should put on rail versus jobs. And so I noticed you don't really have jobs in here. I know you're going to get data, I guess, for jobs, but this, access to the rail. It's just kind of interesting how this ties in also with the housing, because it seems like we're going to try to put most of the housing right along where the rail exists and where transit opportunities are. And when you say you're going to be looking at future transit and transportation, I mean, housing is going to weigh in a big factor on that as well. It's more of a comment than a question.
But I would say what you just said is spot on in terms of what we're trying to look at. What we're trying to really understand and understand from the cities is based upon the land use that we have today. What are you specifically planning to do over a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year horizon? Because that will directly shape both our short-term and long-term transit plans. So you're spot on in terms of, this is not decisional. We're not saying that we're going to go and do anything as a result of this. It just tells us these are the tools that will be available to us, but a lot of it's going to be dependent upon where that development takes place, where the population centers are going to be, and what infrastructure is available. To give an example, like Palomar Airport Road. Assuming that the city of Carlsbad adopts a policy that says we're going to significantly intensify and densify the use along that corridor, and we're going to preserve the median for a rail system in the future, that's something that makes that a possibility. But let's say they don't do that, and let's say they don't preserve any right of way, then it likely takes that off the table completely. And so what we're trying to do is to engage everyone right now about a discussion that says, hey, likely as we move forward in the future, we need to get answers now sooner rather than later so that we can plan wisely and cost effectively for transportation.
Just to add to that real quick, we did do an employment commute analysis earlier in the study, and Katie has that as well if you're interested.
Board Member Jenkins?
I have one more question, maybe a silly question, but what's an e-bike?
Oh, an e-bike, like an electric bike.
Okay. Okay.
So it
That
has,
people would be riding, not that we would be providing, but people are riding right now?
it's theoretical. So, if there were bikes in that particular area near the transit station and you wanted to take an e-bike or electric bike
Okay.
somewhere, that's the shed that you would be able to get as far as from the transit station. So it's an
Okay.
electric assist bike that basically as you start pedaling, it assists you. So you,
Okay, I got it now.
Yeah.
Those things you banned in San Marcos.
So we've been, all our jurisdictions have been pretty impacted by the RENA decisions. And Jim, you're working on the next round, which is going to be pretty significant. Yes, and NCTD is trying to get out in front of that and have the land use tools that can help as NCTD works with our jurisdictions to come up with plans for transit-oriented development. I do have one question. The recommendations in this report are going to be further refined through NCTD's Strategic Multimodal Transit Implementation Plan, which will be initiated in May. It says, I'm assuming May of this year. And so how will that?
We have a presentation coming up.
In July, we'll be going over the scope of that study and the timeline. and
Okay,
we'll-
so does it have public outreach as well, or is that
Yes.
more? Okay,
Yeah,
so.
it has a technical working group as well, public outreach, and then a large data component that incorporates cell phone data and social media analytics.
Okay, very good. So this is received the update, and so we consider it received. Thank you very much. And moving item number 15, Sean Lufbro, Chief of Safety and Rail Security, is going to review item 15.
That's me. Thank you. Do I get to? Oh, I get a clicker today. Thank you. Anthony, let me have the clicker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the quarterly report for safety and security. This is for quarter 3 to fiscal year 19, which will be January through March. But some of the data covers the year, so you'll see a little bit more. We'll talk about some of the recent statistics and trends. We'll go over the near miss and trespasser updates, some of the Part 1 crimes, handheld unit utilization. That's how we validate Compass cards. So that tells us whether our passengers are paying fare or not. We'll go over some of the accidents for the first part of the year. We'll briefly touch on the safety culture assessment. For those of you who were the MISBTA committee, we talked a little more in depth, but for the general board, for those that were not part of that committee, we'll touch on a couple slides on that. And then we'll follow up with the last bullet of the FRA trespasser strategy, which was released earlier this year. Here's overall the quarterly trends. Preventable accidents, either no change or down for all modes, which is good. Non-preventable accidents down also for all modes other than Coaster and Amtrak, where there was an increase of 1 for both. Near misses down across the board, as well as Part 1 crimes. So overall, good trending in most categories for accidents and crimes. Here's for the San Diego subdivision. So that is the coaster line again, running from Orange County all the way down to San Diego. Near misses fairly consistent throughout with 3, 5, and 2 for January, February, and March. Trespassers also going down, but this tends to be in the winter months, less on trespassers. As the weather tends to get warmer, we tend to see more trespassers, and we're starting to notice that on the San Diego sub. Escondido sub, that's our sprinter line, again running from Oceanside to Escondido. Near misses and trespassers fairly consistent. Slight dip in January, February, and March. Again, that tends to be the low months, but it tends to be fairly consistent throughout. No new trends noted there. Part 1 crimes are also down, so we went from 14 in October through December down to 6 with 1 to 3 incidents, the most being aggravated assault and a couple of larceny. Law enforcement activity, great across the board, so appreciate the support from our San Diego Sheriff's MOU as well as Oceanside and Escondido PD. You can see the totals there. The first blue column is arrest, so the San Diego Sheriff tends to lead that category. Citations is the red, that tends to be the Oceanside area of expertise, and then Escondido talks to the most folks. They have the most field interviews with the total on the right for all 3 law enforcement organizations. There's our HHU utilization. I can't read that, so if you can, that's great. But what I will highlight is that little red slice of the pie on the left-hand side of the chart. So that's 5.9%. So that's our overall folks that are not paying fare. That's consistently gone down since we started using these handheld units. These are again are used by the conductors on the coaster as well as the train attendants on the Sprinter and our law enforcement partners to make sure that the folks that are riding our modes have the proper fare. We're continuing to see that down, which is good. We're still trying to tackle that yellow wedge of the pie, which is essentially folks not using the fare correctly. So they may buy a pass, but they don't actually activate the pass. Therefore, the fare medium is not being used correctly. So that's sort of our next target of opportunities to make sure we're able to educate folks and make sure that they're using the correct, the fare correctly. F-A-R-E. Here's a summary of accidents for 2019. This is actually year to date, so this just isn't quarterly. This was up till yesterday. We've had 7 accidents on the rail side. All of them were fatal. 2 on coaster, 5 on the Amtrak side. That's a total of 823 minutes of delay. For those of you that need some conversion, that's over 13 hours. It's 13 hours and 43 minutes of total delay. That's just for the incident train. Each of these events typically has a cascading effect on multiple trains. So once you start adding it up, it's a lot more delay time for a lot more folks based on that. Overall, a 5-year average is about 19 accidents per year and 12 fatalities. So we're slightly above so far, but we're coming back to glide slope, what we typically see over a 5-year average for those rail accidents.
Quick question on the accidents.
Yes, sir.
Are individuals who intended to harm themselves included in the definition of accident?
For the strikes, yes. That includes intentional and unintentional acts. For us, the results are the same. We have trains that stop, we have investigations we have to complete, and it's a service disruption that we have to deal with.
My question is to understand how many fatalities and accidents are occurring that are what I would call an accident where the individual didn't intend to harm themselves versus how many where the individual intended to harm themselves that we couldn't have possibly.
Correct. Yeah. Again, I don't have that data. So the cause of death is law enforcement and medical examiner. Those are the folks that have that specific data. But again, to us, the results are the same regardless of why they're there. They end up stopping trains, causing delays, creating additional expenses for us to stop the trains, get additional crew, perform the cleanup activities, and resume service, can include bus bridging, depending on where we're at. So there is significant expense that's involved, as well as the unfortunate loss of life and service disruption for thousands of folks on the trains. On the bus side, for third quarter, we saw 45 accidents, 19 of those preventable and 26 non-preventable. For a quarterly average for 5-year, we are below in all categories as far as accidents, preventable and non-preventable. I'd like to see them go down even more. On the non-preventable side, most of those are POVs coming by or other cars just clipping mirrors, that type of stuff. But we want to certainly focus on the preventable ones and try to take those down even more. Safety and culture assessment, just to highlight for those of you that were not in the MISBA committee, we do this every 3 years. It's designed to evaluate our safety management system maturity level, our processes, and our activities. It's based on a study done by the Transit Cooperative Research Program. They put out a report that says, hey, if you want to measure transit culture safety, this is a good way to do it, provided some sample questions. And our assessment is sort of based on that best practice study that was designed specifically for transit. We do it every 3 years. It's required because it's in our safety plan. And it's also a best practice to do it. If you do it once and forget about it, it's not really good. You actually have to go back and see if there's actually progress made. The last one we did complete was 3 years ago in March 2016. And we do it by a third-party consultant. That way, it's not done by NCTD. You can't say we're cooking the books ourselves. So we had a third party come out and do that for us. We received the final report in April. There's the number of surveys. We did 3 separate surveys. We did one for the agency, one for Bombardier, our rail contractor, and then one for MV Transportation, our bus contractor. Those are the number of respondents that we had. Again, this assessment was done by survey for animosity, or not animosity, anonymity. Does it say animosity? I don't know if that's a word. That's right. So we don't want people to know who actually did the surveys. And so we want them to answer honestly. So that was really the goal. Again, so they were electronic for some. Some of the bus folks don't actually have email, so we provided paper surveys for them, sent them back to the consultant, and he was able to process those. And again, they were focused on perceptions about safety culture, reporting, incidents, and then communication and participation in their contract. There are some goods, so there were some good highlights out of this, and there's also some opportunities for improvement. Some of the goods that we saw, overall good, and this is across all 3 surveys, so this just isn't NCTD or Bombardier or MV. Overall, good communication to employees from supervisors. Most of the employees knew what the safety rules and procedures were, and they had good compliance with those rules and safety procedures. There was an open door policy for managers, so if there was an issue, folks felt that they could come and talk to their supervisor, and that if there were lessons learned from incidents, those were put out to prevent reoccurrence. There was an overall good working relationship with the employees, with their managers or supervisors, which also allows easy reporting. If you trust your manager, you're more likely to report. And that overall, the employees were responsible to make sure the work environment is safe. So the employees felt responsible for safety. They understood that was one of their charters. If I maintain a safe way that I conduct my business, that's good overall for the organization. Specifically for NCTD, there's a couple opportunities for improvement. One of the opportunities, so how these were identified, what I talked about in the committee was most of the questions were structured as above average or strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. So it's a fairly standard metric that you use for an assessment. So if I were to say, I like getting paid on payday, the answer that we would like to see is either strongly agree or agree for everybody, I think, right? Very few of us like to work for free, and volunteering is great, but overall, you need a paycheck. So if over 15% said, hey, you know what, I don't need to be paid this week, or I don't need to be paid this month, then we would say, hey, perhaps there's an opportunity for improvement. For whatever reason, they don't want their paycheck. So that's what these over 15% of negative aspect are, these opportunities that we have for improvement. And that's for all three surveys. For brevity, we're just going to focus on the NCTD ones today. But the full safety culture assessment was sent to each of you. So certainly dive in there if you have additional questions. Happy to answer anything specifically that you have. Some of the opportunities for improvement that were listed for the NCTD side: safety training, initial and refresher. Some folks said, hey, I don't remember what my initial training was, or is there refresher training? We've recently completed a round of annual training for safety, so we're certainly complete there. Also change management. So if folks wanted to change a safety procedure, what is that process and how to do it? And then finally, some folks felt that they didn't have the authority to stop work if they saw a dangerous situation. So those are certainly three things that I feel that we could work on the NCTD side. So we've conducted that training for new hire and annual refresher training. We're also going to onboard on NCTD a position of training where it's more of a, rather than a training specialist, it'll be more of a training officer or program manager to sort of manage the training, not only for the contractor side, but NCTD. And that was kind of the theme that we saw in all three surveys, not only with the contracts, but with NCTD, it was training. So we want to make sure we get that program right. So at administrative folks, as well as safety, is working with the executive director to finalize that job description, and we'll be looking to post that next year. And so that'll sort of bring continuity across the spectrum of all of our activities for training. In addition, we're going to reinforce those procedures on how to request changes in safety policy. How do the folks do that? We'll make sure that they know that, as well as the anyone has the ability to stop work. We want folks, if they see an unsafe act, to stop it before it turns into something significant. It's much easier to deal with it on the front end if it's small before it turns into a large incident. Finally, the FRA released a trespasser study early in February 2019. That's the title. Four focus areas that they wanted to focus on to try to help either mitigate or deal with trespassers. The first one is data gathering and analysis, then their community site visits, funding, and then partnership with stakeholders. One quote that they pulled out of there: typically the FRA has dealt with trespassing and focused largely on education and outreach. So that has sort of been, from the safety mantra, the 3 E's that I like to talk about on how you deal with a problem: engineering, enforcement, and education. I feel that you need a combination of all three to make a solution work. You can engineer it safer, you can educate folks and tell them why it's dangerous and how to be safe, and then you can do enforcement either through policies and procedures. So this is kind of where the FRA led. So their quote is, education and outreach are not enough. Engineering solutions can be used with frequent and consistent enforcement of trespasser laws. So they're essentially coming to the age where most of the safety professionals are, where it's a balanced approach that you need between education, enforcement, and engineering to try to deal with some of these larger issues. The FRA has requested some data specifically for us on trespassing in some of the locations. So we're working with them to provide some of that data, and then potential site visits for them to come out and speak and talk about why trespassing is dangerous, what impacts it does have. And it's just another organization. We can certainly do that, but having folks from the federal level come out is certainly a great assistance to us as well. Pending questions, I believe that's all I have. Happy to answer.
Yes, question from Vice Chair Feller.
Sir.
So I stepped out just as you were starting, and I was reading the trends.
Yes, sir.
Did you make a comment on that at all?
I did. So overall, preventables are either no change or down, which is good. Non-preventables are down across the board, other than Coaster and Amtrak had an increase, but the other modes it was down. Near misses on the rail side are down across the board, which is also good, and then decrease in Part 1 crimes, which is good. So overall, the trends appear to be going well.
I read it, something's wrong with rail near misses trending up.
Rail accidents are up. So the first one's accidents. So Coaster and Amtrak had one additional accident each, but both were non-preventable, which is the sort of middle left column. And then the middle right column where it says rail near miss, those are all 3 green arrows going down. Does that make sense?
Well, it says trending up.
Correct. Accidents. These are rail accidents.
Over.
Those are up. These are rail near misses.
Okay, so I'm saying the third one down says trending up. It's under Sprinter. Keep going to your right.
I think you have a, typo.
Okay.
Nice catch, Jack. Holy cow.
Compass pass.
The numbers are correct, so it's 35 to 28. Good job.
Any other questions? Board Member Edson.
Thank you for the presentation, Sean. I have one question. On page 11 in the binder of the staff report, it talks about the trespassers and shows a graph of them. And I understand the peak in June for the San Diego subdivision.
Yep.
Because that's fair time and there's
Yep.
lots of people parking and crossing the tracks.
Yep.
It peaks way up in October
Yep.
for Escondido, or is that Escondido subdivision? Oh, that is also San Diego.
Correct. It's near miss on the, so for that slide, the near miss is on the top and then the trespassers are on the bottom. So those are both for the San Diego subdivision.
Okay.
So the number of trespassers, like you said, did go up in October and then went down. And that's also a combination of reporting. So every time we sort of remind folks to make sure that we report, we see a spike as well. So certainly geography matters and where people are going, and time of year is a piece of it, but also to make sure that we're getting the data that we asked for. And so reinforcing those procedures to report also usually results in an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Jenkins.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
On page 10, where you specified the 3 separate surveys,
Yes,
so that's a total, if my math's right, of 281.
that's correct.
How many total possibilities were they for?
Slightly less than 1,000. So that was
Okay.
roughly a third
About a third. Okay.
across all 3.
Okay. And then my next question is, you highlighted the positive feedback.
Yes.
Is the negative feedback, is that the opportunities for improvement?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
where we had 15% of negative aspect based on
Okay.
that question. And that's possible opportunities for improvement
Okay.
for the agency. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, with no other questions, we'll consider it received.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. You want this one?
All right, moving on to item number 16, which is receiving the monthly intergovernmental affairs reports. Mr. Tucker, are you taking this or Richard going to have it?
Richard is going to have it, and then Katie is going to jump in.
Okay.
I thought Katie was running up here to do my presentation. She did so many today. Thank you. Good to be here again. It's been a couple months, feels like a long time, even when I saw some of you on the tour. Before I start, though, before Vice Chair Feller catches me, February 22nd on that first bullet should read May 16 today. So before I get called out on that one, I want to own up.
See if I saw that.
So this time of year in Sacramento particularly, and especially today, is kind of a big day. For those of us in Sacramento, we like to say this is when things start to get interesting. Everyone else is interested in the February 22nd date. Hey, look at the bills that were introduced. What are their odds of passage? What do they do? And most of us in Sacramento are like, just hang on till right around mid-May. So today was the suspense file hearings in the Appropriations Committee. So for those of you familiar with the legislative process, the bill gets introduced, gets referred to at least one policy committee. It gets that first scrub in policy where they look at it, does it have merit, should it go forward? And most bills have some sort of a fiscal impact either on local jurisdictions or on the state, and they get referred to the Appropriations Committee. And again, majority of those get referred to what's called the suspense file, where they sit for a couple weeks until you have a suspense file hearing. And this is the process by which the legislature, without really a vote of the committee, decides which bills will move forward, which ones won't, which ones will be changed in our committee,
So this is why the appropriations chairs in both houses are really some of the most powerful members in Sacramento, next to the Speaker and the Senate President Pro Tem, because within their committee, they can look at all these bills and make changes. In fact, I know many authors who watch this hearing today with staff, waiting to see if their bill is getting out. And when it's announced, oh, hey, this bill is getting out of committee as amended, the author says, oh, wow, be interested to see what amendments were made to my bill. So it's a very interesting time. This is where, you know, revenge is exacted on members who aren't in favor with leadership or with the chair of the committee, and bills are held and there's no reason for it. There's no votes taken on it. So it's a very interesting time. And I talk about it because it does play into some of the bills we're going to be talking about today. And again, today, SB 50, which I know we'll talk about, done for the year, which was, I think I'm probably as surprised as anyone, given how much the governor has been vocal about his support of the issue, if not for this specific bill, but wanting to see that move forward. In addition, I mean, the high-speed rail, the Fed's pulling out $1 billion today, ending their agreement with California. So it's a busy day today. The next big deadline coming up for us is House of Origin. So in that legislative process, again, the next big hurdle is for your bill to leave your house, either the Assembly or Senate where you introduced it, and it goes over to the other house. And again, at this point, if you've made it out of your policy committee and you've made it out of appropriations committee, normally the floor is a much safer vote, but that comes up May 31. Your bill has to move forward at that point. So jumping into, the governor last week released his, what we call the May revise. It's the revised budget proposal. He proposes the first one in January. Once those April revenues come in from taxes, the governor produces one second week of May or so. It's a revision that takes into account actual revenues received, makes adjustments on priorities, funding, et cetera. You know, this governor is living the good life right now. Basically, everything he said in January about where he saw revenues coming in has held out and to be true. There was some concern early in the year, January, February, when it looked like revenues were going to be about $2.5 billion lower than projections, but April came back stronger than ever, and I think it was about $700 million or something above what the governor had projected in January that they would be. So his revised proposal last year was actually not much different than the one in January. In fact, there wasn't even a transportation category in it because there were no changes. Probably more significant changes. He did, I think, double down on homelessness funding and some other housing assistance for cities and counties. So that was important. Some additional funding for emergency preparedness, wildfires, things like that. But overall, basically his same proposal. So this is where I get back into, this is where it starts to get interesting, because I think the chair of appropriations, Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, her comments on the budget proposal were, it's a good start. And here we are, you know, one day shy of a month away from when the budget has to be passed. And this is really when legislative leadership and the governor sit down and start to talk about what are our priorities, what are we going to fund, the horse trading happens. You would think they may be all on the same page, but they're not. The legislature has been working under Jerry Brown for 8 years with his fiscal, you could argue fiscal constraints, and they want to see some changes. So you're going to see over the next 3 weeks or so a lot of discussions and a lot of negotiations with the governor, where they're going to, the governor still wants to push for a water tax, things like that. The Senate rejected that proposal yesterday, so you're going to see a fight on how he pays for that. So again, this is where things get interesting. But maybe on the point of the budget proposal, one of the items that we've been working on for years, but last month we had the tour out at Delmar Bluffs during the absolute work window, where we invited legislative representatives and others to come out and walk with us here. We heard some presentations, and I missed last board meeting, so I'm sure there was a summary provided. But sort of our big ask out of that, and we had invited Senator Pro Tem Atkins and her staff, as well as Commissioner Kehoe for the California Transportation Commission, to come and be a part of that. And we're lucky they both were able to attend. But we have a request of a little over $30 million for five years worth of funding to get to work on phase 5, and then the planning and environmental work for phase 6 of the project. And I know personally, getting out there and being able to see this, I noticed many of you and many of the other participants looking down at the ground and seeing the piles, and you're finally able to put all the little schematics that we see on PowerPoints with things that are in the ground and being able to touch and feel. So I thought it was very beneficial. So we did the walking tour, had the participation. In terms of where we go next, we formalized that request to Senator Atkins as well as Commissioner Kehoe. We've been coordinating with their staff in terms of additional information we can provide. This is the time of year where members can make requests in a budget, and of any year to request some big dollars out of the budget. This is the year with the surpluses. So we're hopeful that at least a portion of this will allow us to get started, may be approved in the budget. We'll have to see. That's another one of those black boxes they have in Sacramento. I think 90% of members will make a request in writing for funding for a certain project, and you literally never hear about it again unless they need to put up a vote or they need to do something to help in the budget, and then they'll get called into the leader's office to talk about what did you want on your list, and we have some things you can help us with. So this is going to remain a priority. It's something we're watching closely with. We're coordinating with Pro Tem Atkins' office closely on this to see how we can help. I saw Commissioner Kehoe yesterday at the C2C meeting. She again was appreciative of having gone out on the tour, had been wanting to do it a long time. So this will be first and foremost going forward. Trying to remember how many of these were current based on the actions today. I know these first two, so maybe I shouldn't. I'll see if I say this. So these were a couple transit pass, transit fare bills that we've been tracking. So both of these were referred to the Assembly Transportation Committee, and neither of them were even set for a hearing. Which isn't totally unheard of. Chairs, it's at their discretion whether or not they schedule a hearing for a bill. But you know, a lot of pressure can be brought to bear, especially when the author of one of your bills is chair of Appropriations Committee. I didn't keep a close tally today, but the chair of Transportation Committee, a lot of his bills were held in Appropriations Committee today. I won't say it was connected in any way, but there were a lot of bills held. So neither of these are moving forward this year. The chair of Transportation has asked UCLA to do a study looking at various transit pass programs around the state. What are the different districts doing? How well are they working out? He would like to see the results of that before proceeding down this path. So we're hopeful that this gets completed this year, and that next year we can get back in to talk about this area. A couple other bills related to access and accommodations that we've been watching. Assembly Bill 1351. Again, over the course of Policy Committee, many of these bills for new members or some who have really, really grand ideas get a reality check when they get into a Policy Committee, because staff talks to them about the history of the issue, what's been done before, and then suggests ways that if they want approval in committee, they can amend their bill. So Assembly Bill 1351 originally required districts to basically immediately grant reciprocity for folks, for paratransit riders if they travel to another district. There currently is a process to do that, and it requires some verification and communication. And I think the author had an experience where he had a constituent that it didn't work fast enough for them. So he introduced that bill that would have required probably a lot more resources and a lot of heavy coordination to achieve. This bill has now been amended to simply require the Transportation Agency to study the issue, to look at the issue of how those agencies talk to each other and how they approve that reciprocity. This one was approved in the Appropriations Committee today to move forward. Assembly Bill 752 by Mr. Gabriel requires lactation rooms at transit stations. This one also was approved in Appropriations Committee today. It was amended in committee. We don't know what the amendments look like. We know the big sticker price of the bill in terms of implementation and what it would cost transit agencies was likely big. So it's probably scaled down. Again, we just haven't seen amendments yet, but we'll share that as soon as we see them. Senate Bill 397 by Mr. Glazier. This was best practices on allowing pets during evacuations orders, which hasn't been controversial, and it's actually on the floor moving forward. Equipment and safety. I think we spoke about this at the last board meeting. Ms. Brunner Horvath had introduced a bill asking the PUC to sort of create a standard set of safety equipment, safety devices that could be utilized at grade crossings. That has since been scaled down, and the bill now says if a local agency has formally adopted at like a council or board of supervisors level a plan to look at grade crossings and safety around the grade crossings. It says PUC, you have to send a staffer down there to talk to them and walk through. It's something the PUC already does, but given staffing levels of PUC, sometimes they're delayed in terms of getting down there. So now it just says PUC, you really have to get down and talk to them if they've approved a plan. Senate Bill 336 by Mr. Dodd has been approved by the Senate. It's going to the Assembly. It just requires that if you're a transit operator and you have fully operated transit vehicles, there needs to be some real staff on board to help with emergencies and things like that. Funding program and district issues. Mr. Gloria's Assembly Bill 1413. This was, we'd mentioned this before, a carryover from AB 805 that requires project labor agreements. This is moving forward. It's on the Assembly floor, hasn't changed. Assembly Bill 1785, Ms. Bruno Horvath had held this open. It was a spot bill. It was a placeholder. She amended it just before the deadline to be heard by a policy committee to, I think, address the issue that we have, Mr. Tucker, when we were up there in Sacramento, had spoken to her about in terms of trespassing, the liability that causes on rail operators and transit districts. So it was introduced with language, I think, that she was hoping would achieve sort of that goal. This was one where I think she got into discussions with the Assembly Judiciary Committee staff, and there were probably a lot of concerns about, trying to pull folks out of liability for something that happens on their infrastructure. So this was actually never set for an actual hearing or heard. It'll be a 2-year bill. She'll be open to taking it up in January. So I think that's all I had prepared, but I want to make sure I left some time for questions. I didn't put SB 50 up there. I said it's done for the year. Kind of a little bit surprising. There was a lot of opposition, clearly, but I don't think that's not the whole story here. There's always been opposition on this. We think the author had been making a lot of headway. He's got the support of the governor, and it wasn't held in committee today. It just, the author agreed to make it a 2-year bill, so there was no vote killing it. Nobody's fingerprints are on it, but it's something they're going to want to talk about for the rest of the year.
Question.
Member Desmond?
Could you, I guess, expand on the Assembly Bill Gloria's 1413 about PLAs and projects over $1 million? Where is that exactly?
Oh, I'm sorry. In terms of the process?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's on the Assembly floor.
Okay.
It didn't have, I don't recall if it had to go through Appropriations Committee, but it's made out of policy. It's on the Assembly floor, could be taken up any day, and will then go over to the Senate.
Okay.
So it's almost
up
halfway
for,
through.
Okay, so it didn't have to go through anything today.
No,
Okay.
it didn't. And it was a carryover. There were some provisions related to this in AB 805. And I think there was concern from committee staff like, hey, if you're making some of these changes, maybe these are things that should be applied statewide. And I think that he's taking that suggestion and just saying, if you're a transit district or doing a project over $1 million, this should be statewide policy.
Okay. Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you for the presentation. A couple of quick questions. So I know that I was wondering if we could, I know a lot of this, when I was reading the packet, we said that we were watching the bills. And one thing that I would be interested in doing, and I don't know if we'll be doing this go around, is just understanding whether or not as a board we could start to either support or oppose or whatever, take positions on these particular bills, especially if they're going to be affecting NCTD. Are there any bills that you would say out of the ones that we're watching, or any others that you would feel may affect us, and how can we help support that effort?
Sure. In fact, on this first one regarding transit fare subsidies, this was an area that actually was one of our legislative proposals, and we'd had conversations in Sacramento about this, and we're kind of forewarned that the chair of the Assembly Transportation, they wanted to hold off on this year, like it wasn't going to go forward. There were, the second bill by Mr. Holden was a vehicle that was introduced, so we kind of held our powder. But clearly this is an area that for the next year, that should these move forward, it's doubtful they will this year. Should these move forward, we would likely have conversations and look to co-sponsor or support something that helped us out. If not, we'll do it next year. So here, absolutely, I would say that. Regarding the sort of maybe the lactation rooms in their current form, that one, depending what it looks like coming out of Appropriations Committee in terms of what the amendments are, it may be so scaled down that there's really no real impact. But it may be when we look at, just for applicability, which stations of ours would it apply to and what would be the costs. So not necessarily for a position other than looking at it for impacts and maybe letting the author know if there could be some changes. The other one I don't have listed here that potentially is close to maybe having a position is Ms. Gonzalez Fletcher's AB 1730, which is a SANDAG sponsored bill related to their housing plan, giving them a little bit more time to work on their sustainable community strategy. And that's one I think we've been in discussions with SANDAG about supporting that. That one is kind of a no-brainer. It's flying through the process. I think it's already in its second house and cruising through. So those are the ones off the top of my head that I could see as potentially.
So in general, what we do is when the board adopts the legislative program, if something clearly falls within that parameter, for example, the SANDAG one, we actually send a support letter. It's a letter that the chair sign in support of that, because obviously for us, we want SANDAG to continue to have funding. And so if there is something that matures to something that we want to formally oppose, we would bring it back to the board to approve it if it was clearly outside of the guidelines of what's already articulated in our program.
I would say for the majority of the bills we watch, the introduced version of the bill, or that one that's amended just after it's been introduced, is usually has the most impact on us. And just our experience in Sacramento is, now that you get to May 16, everything we kind of had our flags up about on this list have kind of been notched down because they've been whittled down and amended and narrowed in scope. So, but I mean, that's what we do. We watch for any of those that change that could impact us more.
You're welcome. Board Member Jenkins.
A question about the Delmar Bluffs project. Clearly, I think we've made that our number one priority, as well as others here in San Diego. Do you have a sense as to where we are with, are we 50-50? Are we 70-30? We have no clue.
I don't think I put a number in, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, is any other questions?
What's a lactation? Never mind. I have 7 daughters, or 3 daughters with 7 children each.
So you know.
Heard of a lactation room, so.
Is Katie up?
Yeah.
Katie gonna be, yep, thank you. Thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome.
All right, I will give a quick update on our discretionary grant efforts. So just some recent submittals, some upcoming submittals, and then a few grant programs that we're tracking. So on Tuesday, we submitted a grant application to the FTA's low or no emission vehicle program. That included the pavement of our Wonder Bread facility, 6 zero emission bus chargers, and a solar canopy to offset electricity costs. So thank you everyone for providing letters of support from that. For that, we hope to hear back in August if we get that grant, and we requested just under $1 million. We have also sent out a request for a point of contact for future letters of support. So we're asking each jurisdiction to provide a point of contact to NCTD by May 31st. So we're hoping to speed along the process in the future when we ask for letters of support. Some upcoming grants we have at the end of the month, the Transit Security Grant Program. We will be asking for funding for an intrusion detection system design and equipment. We also have the Bus and Bus Facilities Program, which announced funding yesterday. That's an FTA program that will have $423 million available, and we'll be asking for replacement CNG buses. And then we have our BUILD program, the Better Utilizing Infrastructure to Leverage Development, and that's due July 15th, and we'll be seeking funding for the replacement of Bridge 208.6. And then a few programs that we're tracking, we have the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust. So that makes available $130 million over the course of 2 years. So in 2019, we expect that to open late summer, early fall, and they'll have $65 million available for zero emission transit buses, as well as school and shuttle buses. And then we also have our Carl Moyer funds. We are hoping to request 2 additional locomotives for the cost of $14.6 million.
And so we'll tag team this for a little bit.
Yeah.
So in your packet is is kind of an education point sheet related to this program. And I'm going to just piggyback off of what Katie has said and kind of some of the discussions we had here in the board meeting. If you all recall, a couple of months ago, we shared a presentation with you all where we went through kind of the feasibility of a sales tax in North County. And I think the board made certain conclusions about the possibility. And we said we were going to all work collaboratively and strongly towards supporting NCTD and getting discretionary grant funds and advocating for NCTD's needs. And I would just say, candidly, as the executive director, it's been a push in the early stages of getting letters and getting indications of support from the cities. And so I would ask you guys to really ratchet up the efforts on that, make sure there's coordination within your city infrastructure. Ideally, when we put together the packets for these grant applications, all of the support letters should be bundled within that package. And for us, I think, we have 8 to 9 letters this time. I think maybe 4 in the packet, the rest coming separately. That's not necessarily creating a compelling case to the Department of Transportation that there's strong public support. So I've asked my team to work closely with me so that we can reach out to a broader section of folks who we believe to be stakeholders to help generate more letters of support. But I would urge you all as board members, we need you guys to be actually a lot more proactive and a lot more active. And the example I'm going to give you guys is this Call Moyer program. This program exists as a statewide program. It's managed locally by the Air Pollution Control District. For us, in terms of the locomotives, we received a grant, I think it was 2 years ago, of $10 million to help offset the cost of $38 million to replace 5 locomotives. In general, for us, what we've analyzed is that the return from a statewide perspective in terms of GHG reduction is really high when we replace one of our old locomotives with one of the cleaner, newer locomotives. And so if you look at that application grant guidelines, we would be typically eligible for 85% of the cost of the replacement of a new locomotive. The issue for the Air Pollution Control District is they only get $4-point-something million a year. And so what we're laying out is we're asking you all to go and advocate and ask ARB and others to bring more money to the table so that we can push the number up well beyond $2 million per locomotive, closer to $5 to $7 million, to a total of $12 million, a total of $12 million for the locomotives, so that could underwrite the cost of us having to use other dollars for those locomotives. And this is where you can make a meaningful impact. We've been on the phone. I've been nagging the Air Pollution Control District probably for the last year. So, and we had a conversation with them yesterday. Hey, feedback to people is helpful. Doesn't mean it necessarily change things, but we really do need you guys' help in terms of advocating, picking up the phone, sending letters, and taking meetings. I can say that we're for sure going to be reaching out to you, Supervisor Desmond, as part of this process. But I just can't understate how much more assistance and leadership we need from the board on this issue, and moving it beyond your board to your entire city council, sending in individual letters. You as individual board members can send in individual letters. So we're asking you to advocate because we kind of agreed to a track that we're going to go on to be able to meet our capital needs, and we need you guys to help push the train down the tracks.
Matt, we sit on many, many boards. As a mayor, I used to get hundreds of emails a day. Pick up the phone and call us and tell us, hey, I need you on this. And we can get it, we can make it happen. And it's not because we don't want to. It's just, it's with the plethora of requests that we all get, it's sometimes they get lost. And so pick up the phone or have somebody else pick up the phone. If you're busy too, you're in the same dilemma, but have somebody call us and say, hey, Jim, we need a letter on this supporting it. It's like, get on it. It's like, okay. So that's what motivates me at least.
I agree.
Board Member Edson.
You were speaking to the choir. So in the past, I've only been on the board a little over 2 years, but in the past when the requests came to me, instead of being sent to my mayor, they were taken care of in a very timely manner. but my mayor doesn't serve on this board. So he serves on a lot of other boards, and he's getting requests from them, and he's going to address those things in a quicker fashion. And I know that I received it, on average more than 200 email a day. So surfing through that and putting it on somebody's shoulder that's not a board member, I don't think is the right path to take, because, you know, we were one of those cities that, even though there were intentions, and I put my support in right away, because fortunately I was copied on that letter, and so I was aware of it, but you addressed it to him. So he had to tell staff yes in that letter. And then it only went out with his signature, not in the past. What would happen is I get it, I send it to my city manager and staff member that supports me, and copy my mayor and say, I support this. It would be great if we had the signatures of other council members on this. And that gets the ball rolling. But relying on someone who's not really part of the team to play like a team member who's busy isn't the best route.
Well, I think we can work to improve the system and maybe have a way of monitoring what requests are out and when they're due, and put together sort of a suspense file that we can follow this.
Agreed. In fact, we had a meeting on that a couple of, literally 2 days ago, after we were struggling to get the letters in. And so we're already have tweaked the process to be able to do that. So yes, we're going to be like a telemarketer calling.
Board Member Jenkins.
We'll try not to hang up on you like we do the telemarketers. My question is not right here, but as you speak with us monthly and brief us on things, could you tell us individually if you know, my agency is lacking and if we need to do something? So if you can give us that update.
Board Member Franklin.
I received your emails and noticed that there was a BCC list that I was on. I assumed that you were communicating with the staff at my city, but I realized I might have been falsely assuming that. So I started forwarding your stuff to our city manager, asking him to assess and provide recommendations and take action. But so it sounds like you're compiling a staff list and you're going to get those folks on. If two things. One, if you would send a, not a blind copy, but if you'd send a regular to me and our city manager, and say, Councilman Franklin, would you put this on your city's agenda? Then I'll reply and say yes, and then that'll be the cue to the staff to put it on the agenda. We'll put it on consent if we even need to. I'm thinking we could do a legislative policy item update where we authorize it, and staff says it's been authorized by a blanket legislative policy. We're going to sign these letters at NCTD's request as long as they conform with the policy the council's made. And then last suggestion, publish to all of us a list of the cities who have taken action and those who haven't. And we'll start to notice that we're on the naughty list. And that might drive us to say to staff, hey, why are we on the naughty list?
And I would just say on this, we sent out a letter yesterday based upon what the board approved last month in terms of us sending a letter about our discretionary grant program. We sent the entire document out to the community. And so kind of the feedback you guys are giving is the same feedback I gave to staff. We're going to have to even be more involved in terms of managing to make sure we get everybody as busy. And I think it's just two sides, is that we also need you guys to do some forward communicating at your city, to whether it be your city manager and your staff, to say, hey, be on the lookout and be as responsive as you can about that. And we'll work to make sure we're a little bit more proactive than we were the last round.
Maybe if you took 3 deputies and gave them each 3 cities to come have a meeting with the mayor and board member and city manager, and you could intensify the concentration on the subject matter. But I think we just need to systematize this. Yeah.
Okay, you done, Katie?
One other note on our strategic working group. We sent a letter to the strategic working group that was regarding our legislative agenda a few months ago. We've received 2 responses to date from Del Mar and Carlsbad. So we have not yet scheduled our first working group meeting, but that's on our list.
And so I guess that prompts me to say it's not going to be staff efficient if we're going to set this up and we're going to have two cities participate. And so we'll send back out the communication and we'll follow up with phone calls because, this is something the board requested that we create a legislative committee. And so we need to just see if there's going to be real participation because Richard's going to be participating as part of that process.
So we need to have at least me as well as our city manager on all these communications.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Moving on to item number 17. Hoon Park Lynch is our Chief Financial Officer is going to review the update regarding the development of the draft proposed FY 2020 operating budget.
It's 4:20, fun time to go over numbers. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm here to present an update on our proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2020. The board does not have to take any action today. The actual approval of the board, the adoption is going to be June 20th, but I am going to provide, an update of how it looks like. An initial presentation was done to the PAF committee back in April, so the numbers have not changed. We have revised our forecast to update based on our March financials, and based on that, our carryover for fiscal 2020 still remains at $3.9 million. So with that, during the budgeting process, there are a lot of assumptions that come into place, especially on the revenue side. Obviously, if the situation changes, that's going to change our revenue estimates. So it's really important for us to kind of establish what are those significant assumptions that came into place. The biggest ones, obviously, for us are the funding sources from grant revenues. This is just to kind of provide an overview of what estimates are used to estimate those revenues. The federal grants are based on the federal transit apportionments tables published by the FTA. So those are actually, those are almost set in stone, so those are probably not going to change. We use FTA funding for capital program and also for operations for preventive maintenance activities. PM activities are used, our funds are used to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. Transportation Development Act funds, that's probably the largest fund of operating grants that the district receives. TDA is it's a 1/4% sales tax on taxable goods. It's a statewide tax. The state of California through the Franchise Tax Board administers those taxes, and then they are in turn returned back to the county. NCTD collects about 29% of the those taxes that are collected in the county, and that's based on the population estimates that are published by the California Department of Finance. Transnet revenue is a local tax. It's a half-cent sales tax in the county of San Diego. And those are those are estimates that are provided by SANDAG, and they are based on the growth of rate in the taxable sales in the county. And again, those are distributed to NCTD also based on their population. And for fiscal year 2020, it's going to be based on our population in 2017. At the state level, we also receive state transit assistance funding. This funding is derived from the sales tax on diesel. With the passage of Senate Bill 1, actually we receive an additional funding from sales tax on diesel and also from the increase on the vehicle registration fees. STA funding has two components to them. One of them is PUC, which is Public Utilities Commission, 99313. Those are allocated based on the population estimates. For fiscal year 2020, we expect to receive about $4 million from STA. And under PUC 99314, those are based on the revenue amount of each eligible STA operator. And for fiscal year 2020, we expect to receive about $843,000. Also, as part of SB1, there's a new funding source that's state rail assistance. This funding was it's mostly used for commuter rail operating agencies. For the first 3 years of the program, from fiscal year 2018 to 2020, It's distributed equally between the 5 commuter rail operators in the state. Beginning fiscal year 2021, that formula has changed, and it's going to be based on floor and then on a variable metric that's based on statistics. Those statistics are going to be ridership, linear track miles, and passenger revenue miles. So with that change in formula for NCTD, it's going to be about $400,000 less in revenue than what we received in fiscal year 2020.
Quick. So what was the total we received in the previous years? If it's $400,000 less than what?
$3.9 million and progressive about 4.1. So we expect to receive in fiscal year 2021 about 3.7.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Then at the same time, fare revenues, they are projected, there are planned fare increase in September 2019. We are projecting that it's going to increase our revenue by about $1.2 million. However, there's potentially a loss on ridership, somewhere between 1.19% and 4.57% based on the mode. So it ranges based on fixed route or bus or rail. Other revenues, we receive other sources of revenue, mostly from right-of-way share use agreements. We receive permits, leases, advertising. We have projected that those are going to be about 0% to 3% higher compared to fiscal year 2019. We base that on historical trends and also based on the Federal Reserve estimate inflation of 2% in 2020. And another significant assumption, although right now it's pretty set in stone, is the contractual adjustment that we do for our purchase transportation with our biggest contractors, Bombardier Transportation and MV Transportation. That within the provisions of the contract, the rates are adjusted by the lower of 3% or CPI. So that was it was a little bit over 3% for fiscal year 2020, but it's capped at 3%. So for the next upcoming budget, there's going to be a 3% adjustment. Other significant assumption, one of the besides purchase transportation and professional services, the district expenses a significant amount of funds for fuel costs. We have a fixed price contract for the provision of our unleaded and for diesel fuel for our locomotives. That fixed price contract will end in January 2020. So during the development of our budget, we estimate our fuel costs based on the level of total miles are going to be ride from our different modes of transportation, and we apply the contracted rate, which up until January 2020, which is about 7 months of the fiscal year, is for diesel, it's at $2.53 per gallon, and for unleaded, it's at $2.81 per gallon. Now, for the fuel costs for the remaining 4 months of the budget, which is from February and June, we don't know what that's going to be because obviously that's dependent on the bidding process. So what we did is just we took an average of what were the fuel costs between July 1st, 2018 and March 18, 2019, where the price per barrel of oil hovered around $60. So based on that estimate, we have budgeted diesel to be at $3.91. That you can see it's quite significantly higher than for the first half of the year. And for unleaded, we have budgeted at $3.13 per gallon. Also, another source of fuel for the district is from compressed natural gas. The majority of our Breeze fixed route fleet runs on CNG. We do not have a fixed price contract for CNG. Our CNG is procured through San Diego Gas and Electric, and we budgeted that cost based on 0.41 cents per therm. Part of the cost from CNG is offset by the credits that we receive through the California Air Resources Board for the Low Carbon Fuel Standards Program. For our payroll costs, we have not, our headcount remains at 134.25 FTEs. And then we assume the potential maximal eligible adjustments based on performance of about 2.75%. One thing that we do want to bring up here is that when we develop our budget, we take a conservative approach. So we budget our payroll based on 100% staffing, no vacancies. And then at the same time, within our payroll costs, a lot of employees work on capital projects. So when they work on capital projects, those costs are charged to capital projects instead of our operating budget. So we have assumed that our payroll fully burdened payroll for capital projects is going to be about $1.5 million for the next fiscal year. Those are charged to capital projects, and those are reimbursed by the capital grants that we receive for the most part from the Federal Transit Administration. So I'm going to drink a little bit of water because otherwise I'm going to start coughing. It's water. Then other assumptions that we have made, we have other expenses for utility costs, subscriptions, office supplies, water, trash collection, whatnot. We have we have forecasted those expenses to be somewhere between 0% and 3% higher than the prior year. Again, the same way that we budget our revenue, which is based on historical trends and the Federal Reserve 2% inflation rate target for 2020. One thing that we do want to bring up here is that we did not include the pension and funded accrued liability payment as part of our operating budget. This has been brought up in prior meetings that for the next few years until we pass that, what we call that financial stress from the purchase of the locomotives, that will be paid through net assets, and we expect to get repaid somewhere around fiscal year 2025. And then,
say that again, please.
so within our operating budget, there is the pension cost has two components. It has the actual pension cost plus the unfunded accrued liability. The unfunded accrued liability is those payments that we have to make for pretty much to fund our pension.
Okay.
So we have not, when we present our operating budget, that payment is not included in this operating budget.
For the unfunded portion.
Correct.
And you said, why is it not included?
It's been historic. It's never been included. It's always been paid from net assets. So when we worked on our 5-year and long range budget, this is something we talked about, that we wanted to move this in the future to something that is paid out as part of the budget process.
So what I'm hearing is we're doing it the same way we've done it, and
we're calling it out.
So, and you're calling it out when, in 2020? Well, you're going to include it into the budget later? Is that?
No, what she's saying in the future budgets. So kind of what we've talked about and is that this 20 to 24 budget is really a 5-year budget that we're trying to implement. And within this 5-year budget, we're trying to purchase quite a bit of new equipment.
Okay.
And what we said is that we did not want to accrue any new debt. And so we were planning to cash flow through our existing net assets to be able to pay the bills. And within the same framework, Yoon and I have been working on how do we make the district even financially stronger in the long term. And so one of the things that we said is that we didn't want, after we navigated through this 5-year period, to continue the historic practice of paying for this unfunded liability through net assets. We want to pay it through the budget process and continue to grow our net assets in the future.
So we're making the payments.
We're making the payments.
But we're making them through net assets.
Right.
Okay, I guess I need
It's accounting.
another lesson, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't quite get what that means as opposed to out of the budget. So we don't have to go into it right now, but you and I'll have to talk.
Yes.
And then at the same time, the district has to make the repayments on the debt for the Sprinter and the construction for the Sprinter. And that's about also $1.25 million per year. And that's also going to be paid from the reserves. Let's remember that with the pass-out to SB1, the district really received a substantial amount of revenues for about $5 to $9 million with SRA. But that money is committed for the next 3 years for the purchase of locomotives. So that's kind of the financial constraint that we currently have, that in order to be able to pay those locomotives and not incur debt, we have to use our reserves until fiscal 2025 when we can get repaid from those new sources of revenues. And then again, we also assume that for fiscal year 2020, we'll have approximately $3 million of carryover from operating income from fiscal year 2019. That's going to be used to fund our expenses for fiscal year 2020. So with that, in this table, we are showing different columns for our ridership. We're showing how a fiscal year 2018 ridership was compared to the fiscal year 2019 budget, our forecast, and our proposed budget. The increase in fare prices reflect, which I will show you later, we do have a slight decrease in ridership compared to what was originally budgeted. We are forecasting that we are going to end up about $10.3 million, 10.3 million riders compared to the 10.6 million riders that we had originally budgeted for. Again, the increase in fare prices will compensate for these loss of ridership, so we do expect to have higher fare revenue, even if there's a significant slightly drop in an overall ridership. So here you can kind of see, for example, that our revenue for passenger fares will go from a $15 million forecast to about a $16.8 million forecast budget for fiscal year 2020. We are obviously assuming that fare increases will take effect in 2019. And then if you see the different line items in there, passenger fares are the revenues that we receive from the passengers. Non-transportation revenues are revenues that we receive for advertising and leases, permits. And then auxiliary revenues are revenues that we receive from shared use agreements with BNSF and Amtrak for the usage of the right-of-way on the San Diego subdivision. And then federal grants are funds that we receive from the FTA to pay for our preventive maintenance expenses. State grants, that's the State Transit Assistance, that's the tax on diesel. And the local grants is the Transit Development Act TDA funds from sales tax, and Transnet, the San Diego sales tax. You will see in there that there is a significant change between what we had budgeted for local grants between FY19 and FY20. And the reason behind that is that NCTD has a level of discretion to program some of our local funding. So TDA and STA can be used either for a capital program or for an operating program. So as part of the fund program with SANDAG, we determine how much capital funds we need for the next fiscal year. When we budgeted last year, we made with the assumption that we will need a lot more operating funds than we actually end up needing today. There's a lot of expenses that didn't really happen, and then therefore we're not going to reprogram those funds. So basically, it's a good thing. We were in the positive, therefore we did not have to sacrifice any of our capital funding to pay for our operations. This is kind of just a pie chart to kind of provide a visual of where mostly our funding is going to come for our operating, to pay for our operating budget. You can see here that the most significant funding sources are TDA and FTA. And then followed after that by PM, by fare revenues from our passengers and Transnet. And here we are presenting what are going to be our operating expenses for the next fiscal year. By far, the largest expense that NCT incurs is purchase transportation. And those are the costs associated with the combined rail operations and maintenance contracts that we have with MV and Bombardier. So that's by far our biggest expense. For fiscal year 2020, we are budgeting about $66 million for that expense. The second one after that is professional services. In the next slides, there's a brief recap of what are our major professional services. That's about $19 million for the next fiscal year. And then our payroll and benefit cost is going to be about, not much change from prior year. It's about $14 million. Just a caveat, when we budget for salaries and wages, we don't, any paid time off for holidays and vacations are budget as salaries and wages. But when employees actually take the time off and the holidays, they kind of get reported as employee benefits. So when you look at the budget, you have to kind of look at them together. You cannot separate them. They're just one and the same. And then one of the big things that you'll see here is that the variance to last year budget, some of the large ones is obviously the increase in our purchase transportation costs, because we have a 3% adjustment for the next fiscal year. And then the big decrease on lease expenses was because NCT did not move forward, or actually is still in the bidding process with IDOT. We did not lease the locomotives in fiscal year 2019. And we have not budgeted any lease costs for fiscal year 2020. And this is just a visual to show that, obviously our largest expense is purchase transportation. If you really look at the pie chart, you will see that NCT does not really have a lot of discretion on how we, on our operating budget, we have certain costs that are almost fixed and are outside of our control. Those are purchase transportation, fuel costs, utilities, and to some extent, obviously, staffing costs. This is a quick recap of our professional services. For fiscal 2020, we have budgeted about $19.2 million for professional services. This shows where, by division, what the majority of those costs are going to be in. And you can see that the largest ones are for the development services and for the security and safety and oversight. For development services, the largest expense is related to electric contracts, emergency work, plumbing, facility maintenance contracts, or whatnot. And the largest expense for the security and safety division are the law enforcement contracts with the San Diego Sheriffs, the City of Oceanside, and the City of Escondido. So in here, you can kind of, oh, did I turn this off? Okay. It's not over. In here, you can kind of see just from, in descending order, which are our largest professional services. And like I said, the facility maintenance contract with Bombardier for the maintenance of our Coast and Sprinter transit centers. That's about $4.4 million, and followed by the contract that we have with the Sheriff's Department, San Diego Sheriffs. Any questions so far? No? Yeah. And then this is just a quick recap of what I just showed, our total operating revenues and our total operating expenses. So our revenues are projected to be a 113.5. Our expenses, $117 million. The difference is going to be used with carryover for fiscal year 2019. A lot of times it's a timing issue. You budget certain expenses or salaries or professional services are going to happen in fiscal year, and for timing issues, they don't happen in the following year. So anyway, we are going to cover that with the projected operating income that we expect to receive in fiscal year 2019. And this is just a kind of quick, NCTD as a policy adopts a balanced budget. So you can kind of see that we, for the most part, our operating income is high, our operating revenue are higher than our operating expenses. And then the shift in fiscal year 20 is going to kind of be covered with that additional income that we're going to see in fiscal year 2019. And in here, the capital improvement program, was approved by the board back in December 2018. So the table here is a refresher to remind everyone what our capital program is going to be for the next upcoming fiscal year. This capital program is the one that was submitted to SANDAG as part of the Regional Transportation Capital Program. And it does not include the limited NTP that was approved by the board for those 2 additional locomotives. So for the next fiscal year, you can kind of see that capital program that we have $48 million. That was made possible in large part from the new funding sources that we received from SB1 for STA and for SRA. And the majority of the funding that we're going to receive, the major investments that we're going to be doing in the next fiscal year is going to be for revenue vehicles, for rail, and for bus. Any questions so far? Okay, so like Matt was saying, we really have to look at our budget process, not like just a 1 year. We really have to look at it in long term. So in here, what we're doing is that we're presenting what we call a 5-year operating and capital forecast. Some of the things, again, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of estimates that come into play when we make an estimate for our next 5 years. So I'm going to disclose in here what were those assumptions that we made when we developed a 5-year plan. For fair revenues, we took into account the 9 months of fair increases that we expect to get in fiscal 2020. It's planned to make it be in effect sometime around September of this year. However, for the subsequent years, we took a conservative approach, and we have remained, that's flat. So we have not make it any higher or any lower. We just conservatively projected those revenues to be flat. For the federal TD and Transnet revenues, those are SANDAG presented an estimate to the Transportation Committee back in February 15, 2019. So we use SANDAG's estimates to incorporate in a 5-year plan. For STA, State Transit Assistance Funding, that remains unchanged from fiscal 2020 levels. Again, conservative approach. And for the state rail assistance, we have based those based on the estimates from the California State Transportation Agency. They have estimated that those revenues are going to increase about 4.2% every year. But that's not necessarily mean that NCT is going to receive 4.2% more because the formula changes in fiscal year 2021. So it's really 4.2% more beginning FY21 with a baseline of $3.7 million. One of the things that we also incorporate in a 5-year plan is positive trend control, PTC, that came into effect in December of this last year, December 2018. So all those costs associated with the implementation of positive trend control and for the first year maintenance are going to be funded through the project that we currently have. That project is currently funded with a mix of different funding sources. There's a Federal Rail Administration funding, Prop 1A, Prop 1B, some TDA, some STA. But after that, we no longer have those projects to fund these operating costs. And at the time that this was developed, those PTC costs are estimated to be about $3.5 million additional every year. So it's one of the things that got mandated to NCT by the federal government. They finance and the capital costs, but they're not providing any additional funding sources to pay for the operations. So that's I heard potentially that 3.5 could be slightly higher. And then at the same time, NCTD, because we have these additional costs related to the maintenance of PTC, NCTD has initiated discussions with Amtrak and BNSF to share the costs associated with the PTC operations and maintenance. And then also within our 5-year plan, we have incorporated service expansion as part of the regional plan from SANDAG and the double tracking and mid-coast project. There's going to be additional cap and operating costs related to service frequency. Those have not been, actually clarification, those have not been included in the forecast. So SANDAG, I believe, is going to pay some of the operating costs related to servicing the additional frequency through Transnet funding. But we don't know yet when it's actually going to be placed in service, what the actual costs are going to be. So those have not been included in this 5-year plan. Other things that have not been included in this plan are the potential impact of discretionary grants. And also we have not included any potential expense reductions that, again, taking the conservative approach, staff vacancies, when we budget 100% staffing, we don't really determine whether or not we're going to be 90%, 95%. So we have, when you look at 5-year plans, it's assuming at 100% staffing levels. There's also other adjustments that happen through the year, which are contractual liquidated damages, and those have not been included in the 5-year plan. Other items that have not been included in the 5-year plan is the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. This is TRCP. This is potentially a new funding source for NCTD. through an agreement with Lausanne. It's still in discussions in the negotiation phase. So for now, those have not been included in the budget. And then other operating revenues and expenses are projected to increase by 3% annually. So again, these are all assumptions because any plan is always your best estimate based on the information that you have at that point in time or what you think those revenues and expenses are going to be in the future. So it's important to note these because depending on how these pieces of the puzzle come into place, obviously numbers can change. And then we do want to point out that there are some pressure points on our operating capital budget. Obviously, the CalPERS unfunded accrued liability payments. We have to continue making our payments for a Springer debt and a Springer both for principal and interest. And consumer price index, we don't know what those are going to be. Obviously, our purchase transportation and contrast is capped at 3%, but fuel costs, utility costs, those are just an unknown in the future. And then obviously the implementation of regulatory requirements, we have the additional costs that we have to incur for operations and maintenance for our PTC system. In addition, asset management plan and compliance programs as they happen through time. It feels like every year there's something new that comes into place and there's more compliance requirements. And in order to be in compliance, there's obvious costs associated, with those programs.
I have a quick question. How many more years of Sprinter debt do we have? Approximately.
About 2035, at least 20 more years. I could double check. It's not CalPERS.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's close.
Yeah. And then, like we mentioned below, we are going to be using our net assets to cash flow our capital needs. And then historically, we have used net assets to pay for Springer debt payments and CalPERS unfunded liability. But 5 years from now, our expectation is to repay back net assets with additional funding sources. And once we pass this huge investment that we have to make on these locomotives, we're going to be able to repay our net assets. And then again, NCTD has a large amount of unfunded capital needs, our unconstrained capital needs, and they're in excess of $1 billion. And we really have to be proactive and successful in the pursuit of discretionary grant funds in order to be able to, pay for these additional capital needs. So with that, what these 5-year operating capital forecast shows is on the total revenues, these are all our funding sources, both from capital and for operations that based on the assumptions that I disclosed earlier, we expect to receive in the next 5 fiscal year, and how all those fundings are going to be allocated. Those are kind of divided into 4 major categories. The capital improvement program, those are capital projects. The preventive maintenance activity, those are costs that we incur for operations in order to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. Positive train control, and also other operating expenses, which include purchase transportation, utilities, fuel, professional services, and salaries and benefits. So you can see in there that overall, we have negative in fiscal 2021 because we have to make that huge investment for our locomotives, and it turns positive. However, that is not including those long-term obligations payments that we have to make for our pension and for the Springer debt repayment. Now, one of the things I do want to bring here is that we have included here the cost for positive train control, but we have not included the revenue that we could potentially get from being a set of Amtrak. So this is kind of your worst case scenario. And it doesn't include that funding from Lausanne from TRCP. So we just kind of hear, this is kind of like a stress test, what will be the worst case scenario. So obviously, as these negotiations are coming to place, you'll see that if we get those additional funding sources from Lausanne and from the positive train control reimbursements, and with the continued funding from SB1 without having to pay for significant amount of funding for locomotive purchases, that's how we plan to repay ourselves after fiscal year 2025.
I have a question. Did you say it doesn't include the Sprinter payments? It does not include Sprinter?
It does not include in the top line, but then where you see the positive, but it's then included in the bottom.
It isn't. Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
see it. I see it.
just say this is good news for us in terms of the stress test, because there are revenues that we haven't brought to the table on this that should manifest itself clearly. But this is the kind of analysis we need to navigate this 5-year period to avoid, incurring any new debt. So this is,
And if those revenues don't make their way here, we will be making adjustments.
we'll be tweaking along the way.
Thank you. I have about 11 questions, but I'm only going to ask one. How far does a therm get you at 41 cents?
David?
We will get you the answer to that. I used to know that. I don't know it anymore.
I mean, will that start the engine or?
We'll give you the diesel equivalent.
Because I'd buy a lot of therms if it was 42 cents.
Good luck making a big 6.
And then, so next steps, we are currently drafting and finalizing our full budget document, and that's going to be released on June 5th for public review and comment. Within that budget document, we also include the classification compensation schedule, the right-of-way cost recovery fee schedule, service implementation plan, and our disadvantaged business enterprise goals for the next 3 fiscal years. And then on June 20, 2019, the board will meet again here at NCTD. We will close the public hearing, and that will be the day where the board will adopt the operating budget and for the next FY 2020.
So looking at that, I would ask if any board members have questions from what they've seen today and you want to dig deeper into it, please get in touch with Matt so that when we get to the 20th, we should have as many questions answered as we can. Okay, I think anybody got any additional questions? Thank you very much for the presentation. All right, moving on. Executive Director's Report.
None.
No Executive Director's Report. Board members' reports, comments, and correspondence. None. Anthony, are there any remaining public communications? Our next board meeting is June 20th, 2019 at 2 p.m. And today we're going to do something a little different. In adjourning the meeting in honor of a member of the NCTD family, gentleman by the name of Jason Dixon. And we're saddened to share the news of the passing of Jason. And I'd like to adjourn the meeting today in his memory. Jason passed away on May 10th after a very short battle with cancer, just days before his 43rd birthday. Jason was hired at NCTD June 30th of 2014 as the Rail Systems Safety Specialist, providing oversight of rail operations safety and regulatory compliance. Prior to working at NCTD, Jason worked as an investigator with the CPUC and earlier with Union Pacific Railroad. Jason was promoted to Rail Mechanical Officer with NCTD in January 2016, where he was focused on oversight of mechanical services for Coaster and Sprinter. He left NCTD to return to the CPUC in November of 2017, but he continued to support NCTD services through his role at the CPUC and was a frequent visitor on site for many inspections and meetings. Jason lived in Hemet with his wife Courtney and his 4 children, Brendan, Autumn, Kennedy, and Logan. And I know you'll all join me in expressing our thanks to Jason for his contributions to NCTD and extending our sympathies to his family on his passing. Jason was an exceptional individual who truly cared about his work and his colleagues, and he will be greatly missed. In Jason's memory, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.